Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Brabber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are continuing our big series of the summer, ranking the top 50 players in NBA history. Today's episode is going to cover numbers 40 to 31. If you missed our first episode last week, we covered honorable mentions, criteria, and also, of course, numbers 50 to 41. So, Logan, before we get into the top 40, why don't you recap who you had in those first 10 spots?
Affirmative, Mr. Breber. I got you.
Appreciate that.
At number 50, I had Jason Kidd. At number 49, I had Russell Westbrook. 48, big game James Worthy. 47, Manu Ginobili. 46, Chris Webber. 45, Reggie Minion. 44, Ray Allen. 43, Damian Lillard. 42, Gary Payton. And at 41, I had Jimmy Buckets, Jimmy Butler.
In my 50 spot, I had Isiah Thomas, the elder, of course. At 49, I had Jimmy Butler. 48, Joel Embiid, which caused probably one of the more heated, prolonged debates in Nerd Sesh history. Today, hopefully things are a little bit more chill. We'll see. But at 47, I had Luka Doncic. 46, I had Bill Walton. 45, Paul Pierce. 44, Ray Allen. 43, Clyde Drexler. 42, Walt Frazier. And 41, George the Iceman Gervin.
You know, Carson, I have no real desire to ever talk about Joel Embiid in any sort of context again after
I know
that.
you don't. And listen, man, it just came to a point where something had to be done. When Chris Webber was put above him, I had to take a stand. But look, we already covered that. In other news, I'm sunburnt. Again, it's pretty much just my nose. I'm not purple.
You look pretty good, bro.
You think so? Sometimes I think a little sunburn adds a little color to me, which I certainly need. But my nose is definitely red. So,
I mean, it looks a little red, but you don't look like frighteningly purple this time.
I appreciate that.
That is a bonus.
I appreciate that. Okay, so let's get into the list. The only thing that I would say real quick to recap the criteria, again, go watch the first episode if you want it more in depth. We are judging these players relative to era. That is true for both of us. And my fundamental guiding principle is who gives me the best chance to win the most championships if I have them on my team for their entire career. And for active players, of course, only their career up to this point, only what they have done up to this point. So with all that out there, Logan, who was in your 40 spot?
In my 40 spot is one of the tougher guys I had to rank on this list, but I feel good about his placement. This is where I landed on James Harden. And it may surprise people to some that James Harden is even on my list, as critical as I have been about James Harden. It may surprise people that James Harden is this low, depending on where you think about James Harden as an offensive engine in basketball history. I knew I had to have Harden on here because he is an all-time regular season offensive engine, but he does have a very damning playoff resume. Over his prime, Harden was a guy giving you 36 and 8 on over 61% true shooting. But he is an all-time playoff dropper, and like I said, I think he has a pretty damning playoff resume, and that is what hinders him from being higher on my list. I actually think that there is an argument for Harden higher on this list because in the grand scope of things, we can kind of take it for granted. He does have all-time longevity, and he is a consistent regular season monster. And I understand bumping him up. And that was honestly the toughest thing that I had balancing where James Harden should be on my list, is the fact that I hate his playoff resume. I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of it here in a minute, but consistent regular season impact, even into the later seasons of his career with the Clippers, the guy's awesome in the regular season. But you mentioned this stat. The most damning one to me is his stat line in Game 7s over his career. The fact that the guy is 18, 6, and 7 on under 51% true shooting in Game 7s. And you look at his stat lines in Game 5s and Game 6s. And just, you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about Harden in this playoff run. There's a consistent track record of him basically being a 20-point per guy, and his efficiency drops like a stone in games 5 through 7s later in the playoffs. And I think there's reasons for this. I think that Harden was very rigid in terms of his scoring arsenal compared to other guys where it translated more, very jump shot and step back three dependent. I think his three ball could leave him at times in the playoffs. He's 32% compared to 36% in the playoffs during his prime. His true shooting efficiency drops by about 3%. He's a very high turnover player as well. In the regular season, he's tied 6th most turnovers per game. In the playoffs, he's tied 17th most turnovers per game in his playoff career. And he has very little impact defensively. And I think if you look at specific series early on in his Houston tenure against Oklahoma City, 2013, he's 39% from the field, over 4 turnovers a game. 2014 against Portland, he's 38% from the field, 30% from deep. He gives you a great game 6 in that series where Dame hits the game winner, an iconic all-time shot. He gives you 34 points on nearly 84% true shooting. He's arguably the best player in that game. It doesn't absolve a bad series for him. And I'll give him credit for the 2015 Western Conference Finals run where they lose to Golden State. The next 7 series after that Golden State Western Conference Finals loss, he is under 42% from the field in all of those series. And he's under 31% from deep in 5 of 7 of those series. The only other real important playoff run to mention with Harden is that 2018 Western Conference Finals run where CP3 unfortunately gets injured, and it's a good closeout game from Harden, but he ultimately goes 2 of 13 from deep, and the Rockets supporting cast lets him down a little bit as well. They get a little 3 happy, and they go 7 of 44 from behind the arc. Harden, like I said, was one of the toughest guys to rank for me on this list because I think that he is an all-time offensive engine. I think he is an all-time regular season performer, but it's hard for me to overlook the playoff shortcomings, and that's a little bit of a theme with this part of my list. I had to mix and match some of these guys. There are guys that I just think impact the game more versatilely, and so while I don't think that maybe they're the caliber of offensive player that Harden is, I think that they had more versatile games than their games did for some of these guys translate to the playoffs a little bit more. So before this show, I played with Harden in all kinds of ranges between like 36 and 40. I ultimately come back to 40, and I just kind of can't overlook the fact that when the playoffs come around, I do just expect Harden to kind of fold, man. That is the sentiment that ultimately I come away with is, as high as the peaks were for him as a regular season offensive player, I just can't overlook the fact that consistently in the playoffs he did underperform.
Logan keeps putting me in positions where I got to defend the playoff droppers and guys who I'm actually really not that high on, not that fond of personally. Like, I don't think I'm super high on Joel Embiid. I had to go to bat for him. And Harden, I don't think the gap is as big between us, but I do still have him up at number 32 on my list. He's probably got a top 20-ish regular season career in NBA history at this point, and the value of that can't be taken for granted, and that does contextualize the dropping, because the point that I always come back to with these all-time great players who are so criticized for being playoff droppers is absolutely, we should criticize them for that. It's a reality for Joel Embiid. It's a reality for James Harden, but you do have to consider that a drop is always relative to the standard you set for yourself in the regular season, which for James Harden, for more than a half decade, was an MVP standard, and for 15 years has been a star standard, whether that be MVP, All-Star, All-NBA. Like, he has been delivering that level of value year after year. And so when you look at the heart of his peak years, it's like, no question, he did drop in the playoffs. And you laid out a lot of the reasons why, I believe. And they are issues that have persisted and honestly become more prevalent in his later career, where he's still delivered star-level offensive value in the regular season, but later in playoff series has worn down. I don't think you should criticize him for that as much when he's 35, 36 years old as when he's a player who has aspirations to be the best guy on a title team, but it is a reality at both stages of his career. And I think you laid out some of the issues that he has had. Struggles dealing with increased playoff physicality. As a player who is very much reliant on shiftiness, not somebody who is athletically imposing, not somebody who has a lightning quick first step, I think increased perimeter physicality at times has been an issue for him in terms of his ability to get by people. I also think his free throw rate dropping noticeably in the playoffs in his Houston years from 0.53 in the regular season to 0.46 in the playoffs, that's another product of increased physicality not being favorable to Harden's offensive game, not getting the same calls that he gets in in the regular season when free throw generation was such a superpower of his. He still got to the line a lot in the playoffs, but not at that same meteoric rate. And I think you hit on another big thing, which is the lack of scoring variety. Like James Harden in the regular season, the step back three was an unstoppable move, and he was so damn crafty, and his ability to mesmerize people with the ball and shift past them. And once he gets downhill, he's getting to the free throw line, he's getting to a floater, he's getting to the rim. Like there were a few great outcomes essentially every time that James Harden had the ball in isolation or in pick and roll. You get to the playoffs, though, and I don't think we can overstate the importance of variety, because variety means unpredictability. It means counters. It means the defense doesn't know exactly what you're going to do, and if they think they do, you have another option that you can turn to. And with James Harden, the reality is he didn't have the off-ball scoring game that a lot of the other great scorers have that is translated in the playoffs. He didn't have the mid-range intermediate game at that level, and so he did, in a lot of ways, live and die by the step back three, and it's a shot that unfortunately left him in a number of postseason runs in Houston. And I do think that over-reliance on the step back three specifically was an issue for him, and I do think the drop later in playoff series specifically is because teams were able to get used to his offensive tendencies, and they were able to sit on his preferred moves, and they just became a little bit less effective as series went along because of that. So all that I agree with you on. I also think the other issues with Harden, just when it comes to the things I don't love about him as an offensive cornerstone, even though he's one of the greatest offensive players ever, the extreme ball dominance, the high turnover numbers, I do think are not conducive to playing with other high-level ball handlers, right? But at the same time, I do think James Harden has shown a really impressive ability in his later years to make any NBA offense substantially better. I did not think that in 2018, when he and Chris Paul teamed up, it was going to lead to one of the greatest offenses in NBA history, because those are two extremely ball-dominant guards. And it did. He was able to improve dramatically that Brooklyn offense and make them one of the all-time great offenses when he was on the court. He was able to go to Philly and make those offenses above average when he was on the court without Joel Embiid, and exceptional when he was with Embiid. And it's no coincidence that Embiid's best scoring campaign over a full season 2023 came when he was paired with the best playmaker he ever shared the court with in James Harden. Then he goes to the Clippers, and now you pair him with an elite off-ball scoring wing in Kawhi Leonard. He enhances him once again. He carries the offense to above average heights when he is the lone star on the floor without Kawhi, and when they're out there together, the offense is absolutely exceptional. And even in Cleveland, this regular season, like when he and Donovan Mitchell shared the court, they had like a 127 offensive rating. It was ridiculous. And when Harden was out there without Mitchell, he was able to really solidify the non-Mitchell minutes offensively in a way that they just were not before Harden joined the team. So when I was looking at prime James Harden, I would have said rigidity is one of my key criticisms of his. I think he has disproved that, at least in terms of the ability to adjust and make so many different offenses so much better.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're making really good points, and these are strong regular season arguments for Harden. I guess my hang-up is, how do I overlook the fact that even though I do think it's impressive his ability to change his style of game, and we talked about this with Tyler on an episode a while back about how impressive it was for him to flip that switch literally in different lineup variations, right? His ability to switch from playmaking and enhancing his teammates and really making that a focal point of his game versus when he is the sole creator and scorer to flip that switch. And I do think it's impressive. My hang-up and why Harden is so low for me is just the fact that even when he discovered that, and it is impressive that he did that in his later years, because I was always skeptical of Harden ever being able to do that. So I do want to give him credit for that.
Sure.
My hang-up with that is the fact that even with the adjustment of play style, it never translated really at all into playoff success, even in his older years. And I just...
Well, I mean, that's just hyperbolic. This is where I think it's just going to be the degrees to which we disagree on these criticisms. We're not going to disagree on any of the pitfalls of James Harden. When you say it didn't translate to the playoffs at all, this is a guy who has the most playoff wins in NBA history without a championship. This is a guy who so clearly could have been the best player on a championship team because he was the best player on a 65-win team that lost in a close Game 7 without his co-star against one of the greatest, most talented teams we've ever seen. Like, there is no way you can view things in these absolute terms and say he couldn't have done it.
Well, I think that was the 1 year it came together. The 2015 and 2018 were good runs from Harden where I didn't feel
2019, he was arguably the best player on the floor in that series against the Warriors. He was 35 a game on 60% true shooting. 2020, he was excellent in that run. He was 30 a game on 64% true shooting. Like, James Harden, again, he is criticized because he didn't play up to the incredible standard he set in the regular season. But you know what he was doing in his prime years? 2017 to 2020 in the playoffs, he averaged 29.5 points, 7.5 assists on 58% true shooting, right? That's the drop that he gets panned for at his best. Those are better raw numbers on better efficiency than what Jalen Brunson has done in New York, right? I'm just using that as a point of comparison that at a base level,
think the numbers
some people get celebrated. I'm not saying that. But also, James Harden still led to good playoff offenses. Not as good as he did in the regular season, but like, you have to acknowledge the luck component of this and the bad breaks. And the biggest thing for me with Harden is you're talking about more than a half decade of an MVP level peak, but it is the longevity that you have 14 to 15 years of flat out stardom. You have 14 to 15 years of very consistent availability. Like, when I think about my criteria, right? That is incredibly important, that I know you are going to be on the court providing star value year after year for a decade and a half, and that he does have underrated offensive versatility. And like you were saying, I mean, he has mastered in his later years, as he's gone from situation to situation, the ability to just sort of slide the scales of playmaking and scoring at volume. Like, it's incredible what he did. Just look at 2024 with the Clippers, right? He's giving you 17 a game. He's super focused on playmaking. Then the next year, Kawhi misses a bunch of time. Now he's an efficient 23 point per game volume scorer, and he gets that team to 50 wins when they had to play most of the season without Kawhi Leonard. Like, we've seen that time and again. When he's on the court without Embiid, he's a volume scorer. When he's on the court with Embiid, he's a hyper-efficient scorer, and he's a volume playmaker, leading the league in assists on a per possession rate, right? Like, that's the sort of stuff we know that he's capable of. He's done it over and over again. Even at his peak in Houston, though, it's like 2017, he's leading the league in assists, right? And he's more playmaking focused. Then you get to 2019, you get to 2020, and he becomes the highest volume isolation scorer in NBA history by far, and he's giving you a couple of the greatest regular season scoring campaigns we've ever seen. And even in the playoffs, he's giving you elite scoring and elite offensive value overall. And the combination of scoring and playmaking that he has is just so rare in NBA history. Like, you're not going to get me to say, oh, James Harden isn't a real playoff dropper. He obviously is. At every stage of his career, he has been, but I keep coming back to where he is dropping from. And where he is dropping from is just such a high level. I couldn't have him all the way down where you do at 40.
I can, and I will, and I'm going to keep him here. But I do understand what you're saying. My hang-up more so than anything else is the play style of James Harden and how I fundamentally don't agree that it translates to the highest level of winning. And that's why he can't be higher. It's like, I do like guys more that the variety, to me, is the issue in the rigidity of his play style and the fact that, by and large, I'm not saying every season, and I want to be clear about this, by and large, as the number one, James Harden was not good enough to get the Rockets where they needed to be. I'm not saying that there weren't individual seasons or runs that he did it, because I agree with you. I do think there's a luck component involved, and maybe there's an alternate reality where Chris Paul doesn't get hurt. I completely look at James Harden in a different way. They get it done. They go to the finals. Maybe I do. That didn't happen, ultimately. And so as the number one, I think by and large, he wasn't good enough to get the Rockets where they needed to go. And by and large, what I also think is damning is that as the number two, James Harden was also consistently leaving his teams hanging. I don't know. I know that I shouldn't probably hold the older years against him as much as I do, but they're just ingrained in my brain, man. There's just only so many times I can see James Harden go into a playoff matchup and recklessly turn the ball over and make ugly, catastrophic decisions and not try defensively and be really rigid in his play style. Like, again, I don't know if that's reputation. I do think I'm biased against James Harden. I will just admit that. Like, I've never really liked the heliocentric sort of style of play that Harden has led. Like, it's just, these things are just stuck in my brain that make me kind of view Harden as a little bit more of a flawed player than most people. And like, I just think it's a little bit harder to win with Harden is one of your key guys.
I just think you are going to have names above him where I'm going to completely disagree with that. Again, I understand the criticisms. And by the way, I think there's just like genuinely some, I don't want to call it character stuff, but like James Harden doesn't exactly have the heart of a champion. There are performances, and we saw some of them in this run, where you see the engagement, the focus, the level of attention to detail is not up to the standard that you want to see when you're trying to win a championship. And yet he was just so good. He was just so good at his best that there's no denying that it could have happened. To say, oh, well, it didn't, so it couldn't have, is just completely disingenuous to me, when a dropping James Harden was still a top 5 player in the NBA for years in the playoffs. Like, he still was that. That's how good he was. And there are players who, yeah, like a Jalen Brunson, I'm going to come back to, won the title this year, had a really good offensive run, had a clutch performance, the likes of which Harden probably never had in his career, but also not a top 5 player on the planet, somebody who was much more fortunate in terms of situation, in terms of the path, than James Harden was when he was at his best, when he had his best teams. And it's hard for me to look at him and think he's not one of the unluckiest players that we've seen in NBA history. Now, absolutely, yeah, he has a large share of responsibility in his own playoff dropping. Like, let me be very clear about that. But I do think 2018, having to go up against those Warriors and the Chris Paul injury, and even though he wasn't good in Game 7, like the comical number of missed open threes from his teammates, like that's just so brutal. 2021, I think, is such an unlucky break, because I do think that Nets team very well may have won the title. They were an unstoppable offense, and for Kyrie to get hurt and Harden to get hurt, and for that to potentially be something that impacted the rest of his career, him trying to play through that hamstring, because 2021 James Harden was still a top 5 player on the planet. Like, his scoring volume went down from the couple years before when he's averaging 34 a game, 36 a game, but that's just because the situation changed, and he was like, all right, now it's my job to be an elite playmaker first, and also a super efficient 25 point per game scorer leading a historically great offense. And he did that. And it was an ugly end of the playoffs, but like, the guy could barely walk out there. So I look at those 2 years, and I do think he's really unfortunate. But overall, I think all the playoff criticisms of James Harden are fair. I just think we're going to disagree probably on the value of the baseline that he gave you as a number 1 at his best, and the uniqueness of the longevity. Like, maybe that's the difference, where I do really value the fact that into his mid-late 30s, he's still giving you star-level seasons. An all-NBA season at 35 is just such a rare thing from a guard in the scope of NBA history, and that offensive floor raising and the ability to do it as a volume scorer, as a volume playmaker, like, it really is a unique thing. So I still think he is not one of the very most impactful players we've ever seen, and that's where I come back to the ball dominance, the lack of off-ball value, the turnover numbers, the subpar defense. That's where his career on off-swing is only plus 4.5. That's not indicating Chris Paul level of impact over his career, right? I think Chris Paul is just a better player. I think he's a better winning foundation, better playoff performer, everything. But still, to have true MVP level impact for a half decade, and then another decade on top of that of all-star to all NBA impact, leading strong NBA offenses for 15 years, that he's making substantially better year after year, like, that is quite a career. And there's very, very few players in NBA history who can claim to have that. So even with the playoff dropping, I do think James Harden is one of those guys where if we simulate his career 100 times, this is one of the lower percentile outcomes in terms of at least him not ending up with a championship, because he's absolutely been good enough to get it done. In my number 40 spot, Logan, I have somebody who I'm almost certain is not going to be on your list, and I think it's probably just an era thing. This is where I have Bob Pettit, or maybe it's him being a part of the most racist franchise in NBA history, the Hawks of the 1950s and early 1960s. But if we are judging him relative to his era, I do think that Pettit belongs on this list. He had an 11-year career in which he averaged 26, 16, and 3 on plus 4% true shooting in the regular season, almost identical numbers in the playoffs. Honestly, an impressive player to watch. There's not a ton of full Pettit games out there at all, but he was a skilled big for the time. He could actually shoot. He could drive. He was quick. He was fluid for a big of the 50s and 60s. He had the classic post game and the hook shots, but also did have that ability to put the ball on the floor as a driver. Great foul drawer, really strong free throw shooter, so he converted those free throws. Good off-ball scorer around the basket, like a very efficient high-volume scorer. Very strong rebounder, too. Just a decent passer, not a great defender, limited a little bit by not great size and athleticism there, not great vertical athleticism, certainly, at a time when, a truly dominant rim protecting big was so impactful. So he does lose some points on that side of the ball. And another interesting thing, I will say, he didn't miss a lot of time. The Hawks did win 52% of their games without him in his career. They were 22-20 compared to 54% of the games they won with him. So not a huge difference there. But again, not a big sample without him. I just think at the end of the day, elite scorer, elite rebounder, best player on 4 finals teams. Context is important there. Making 4 finals at this time is certainly not equivalent to what it is today when you're talking about that Western Conference of the late 50s, early 60s, when often relatively mediocre teams were getting out and then they were just getting trounced by the Celtics, especially at that time. But he did win the one title in which he was clearly the best player on that team. He only led 2 teams ever that were on a 50-plus win pace, so didn't lead dominant teams in his career, but still spent a decade as a top 5 level guy, really great offensive player at the time. And so I do think that peak with good longevity for the era in which he played gets Bob Pettit on my list in the top 40.
Yeah, I don't have Bob Pettit on my list. I think it's poetic that his racist ass had Bill Russell traded and, potentially ruined the Hawks dynasty.
That wasn't
could
him.
Have been. Oh, yeah, sure. Bob Pettit didn't have a hand in that. Yeah. Try
Okay, we'll
convincing me
say,
that, buddy.
Robert E. Lee Pettit, first of all, let's just get it out on the
That's
record. For those
crazy.
who don't know, that is his name. That is
crazy,
his name.
Man.
I will say, though, we often talk about Bob Pettit and we say, oh, Bob Pettit. And I think a lot of people probably don't know why. The Hawks as an organization in the 50s and 60s were extremely racist. Clyde Leveillette was famously like the most outwardly racist player or one of them in NBA history. Just an awful guy. Their ownership management made some racist decisions. And I think the worst thing that they did, at least on the basketball court, is they blackballed one of their teammates, Cleo Hill. They just completely iced out as a racist move. And I don't know how much Bob Pettit was involved in that, but Bob Pettit was there when it was going on. His name is Robert E. Lee Pettit, so he doesn't really get the benefit of the doubt for me. Just getting all that out there when it comes to the Bob Pettit off-the-court stuff, which does not factor in because, unfortunately, there are worse people on my list.
Oh, there's a worst fella on my list as well, but I don't think I have anybody as far back as Pettit on this list, except for, like a few gentlemen. So yeah. I did not put Pettit on my list. I went with Chris Webber in my 46 spot, to be clear.
You did, but I think we covered that sufficiently. Okay, who do you have at 39, Logan?
So at 39, I don't think you're going to agree with this. This is where you've already had this guy on your list, so I know that he is lower for you. I have Clyde Drexler here in my 39 spot. I like Clyde a lot. I think he's one of the most underrated players of his era. I marked down his prime as 86 to 95 over this time period. He was giving you 23, 7, and 6 on 55.1% true shooting. His numbers basically hold up almost exactly. His true shooting percentage drops by 1% in the playoffs, but he maintained for the most part. And I just think Clyde was, like I said, underrated and I think kind of underappreciated and a little bit more versatile than I think people give him credit for. First and foremost, Clyde is just one of the most athletic players of his era. You watch him play in transition. He's one of the best players in the open floor in all of the league. He glides through the air. There's a reason they called him Clyde the Glide. Really good scorer. An underrated playmaker and passer, I think, of his era. Now, he's not like a Clyde wasn't a great processor, and I think that's an important distinction to be made. I don't think Clyde was an exceptionally smart player making these crazy cross-court reads or anything like that, but when he was double-teamed, when the ball was forced out of his hands, he was a good passer, and I think underrated a little bit in that respect, and a good rebounder as well, and a solid perimeter defender. Unfortunately for Clyde, his prime does get completely overshadowed by the fact that he was lapped by Michael Jordan and completely outplayed in that stage. I think for a lot of people, when you think of Clyde Drexler, you think of the finals in 1992 against Michael Jordan, where he gives you 25 points per game, but he does it on 41% from the field, 52% true shooting. That is Michael Jordan's, I could say one of his greatest series ever. Michael Jordan has so many of them. You can pick and choose, but I mean, so damn efficient in that series. Goes a blistering 42% from behind the arc. I think gives you 35 points per game or close to in that series. I mean, Clyde just got completely outplayed in that series. I don't think he had the team up to snuff around him to really go toe-to-toe with that Chicago squad, and I also think that Chicago had some really good personnel to counteract him. Scottie Pippen, Jordan as defenders on the perimeter. That's a tough matchup for Clyde, but I don't want to absolve him from his shortcomings. You know, I think Clyde had real shortcomings when it came to the biggest playoff stages against the best competition. I don't think, like I said, I don't think Clyde was like an elite processor. I don't think he had great basketball IQ. I don't think he was an elite shooter at this stage in his career. I think later in his career, he became a better shooter in Houston, and that helped round out his game and keep him.
He was definitely never an elite shooter, though. His jumper was always a little sketchy.
He was better, though, and it helped make him more efficient in his later years in Houston.
Yeah, well,
but
that shortened three-point line helped him a lot. I don't think it's a coincidence his only 3 decent three-point shooting seasons of his career pretty much came when
But I think he was a better...
was shortened. Outside of 92, when people were saying he was a better player than Jordan because he was a better three-point shooter, because he shot a cool 33.7% from three, and then MJ hit him with the shrug.
I think he's a better mid-range shooter at that stage in his career. I just think it helped him supplement his value where when he lost his athleticism later in his career, he found avenues to offense that he didn't have in Portland. He just really was not even mid-range. It's not just three-point shooting. Like, he wasn't a mid-range shooter either at that stage in his career. The other criticisms I would say, just ball handling. I mean, he's not a great ball handler. For his size at the time, for a 6'7" ball handler, it's not like he was egregious, but he's not an upper echelon ball handler. And so this was an interesting dilemma for me with him versus Harden. I do want to give Clyde credit for playing second fiddle for Hakeem and being good enough to get a title with those later Rockets teams, but I don't think he was ever the offensive engine that Harden was at his apex, and I think that Harden has more longevity than him, but I think Clyde, to me, was more versatile, and I do like the fact that when he played that second role, it did lead to a title. And so maybe I'm unfairly holding that against James Harden, but it has less to do that he was the second fiddle, and it has more to do with I prefer Clyde's versatility to a guy like Harden, where I do think Harden just kind of had this rigid play style. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that Harden fell from a much higher place, and I understand that, but
what sort of podcasting is this? Bro's just doing my spiel for me.
I can just kind of tell. I think I know where you're going to go with this, but I just think Clyde was a more versatile player and impacted the game in different areas as compared to a guy like Harden. But I do understand that argument. I mean, Drexler's peak is definitely briefer, and I don't think he reached the offensive heights that a guy like Harden did. But I did give Clyde the nod, and I have him here at 39.
I'm going to try not to view every single player placement for the rest of this episode through the lens of, oh, this guy is above James Harden at 40. Unfortunately, that's probably going to happen at some point. Like, that's really what happened with Embiid, right? I'm like, oh, okay, you don't have Embiid on the list. I don't love that. But then it's like Chris Webber above him. Clyde is not like necessarily that name. I don't think he's as good as Harden. I don't think he peaked as high. I don't think his longevity is as good. And I do think he's somebody who, in the scope of things, was pretty fortunate. Like, I like Clyde. I always enjoy watching him just because he's such a unique player. But I do think those Portland teams had a really great infrastructure. I think Portland was just a really great organization at this time, and credit to them because they continue to win throughout the 90s after they trade Clyde and then quickly rebuild to the Jailblazers, and they're back in the Western Conference Finals. Like, they just had a lot of success at this time. I think Rick Adelman was a brilliant coach. I think their front office did a great job of putting together a really good roster. Like, Terry Porter, maybe one of the most underrated offensive players in history, an elite jump shooter, a really strong playmaker, good turnover suppressor. Like, he was essential to those offenses. Buck Williams and Kevin Duckworth and Clifford Robinson and Danny Ainge and Jerome Kersey. Like, there was just a lot of talent in Portland. And so they did consistently find success without Clyde throughout his career. And again, they were just fine after he left. Like, they kept winning games. They were still consistently in the playoffs. And in his time in Portland, they were 61-56 without him, won 52% of their games. Then he goes to Houston, and it's like, yeah, he puts them over the top, right? But he did join a reigning champion, and he did join the team of the guy who was clearly the best player in the league. So this is just where I'm saying, if the rationale is Clyde's over Harden because Clyde's team got it done when he was the number 2, it's like, I don't know, man. What if you dropped James Harden on a team with the reigning champion, the best player in the world? Like,
what if
there's
we dropped
a
him on a
difference in
team
terms
with
of circumstance.
What if we dropped him on a team with Joel Embiid, who was arguably the best player on the planet to some, and they had an opportunity to go on a playoff
But you know
run
that's
together?
not the same as joining a reigning champion. And
It's
I don't
not the
think
same,
Embiid was
but
ever
it's like-
the best player in the world. Akeem was flat out the best player in the world. And you want to talk about playoff performance, Akeem in 94 and 95, it's 2 of the 5 greatest, arguably, postseason runs we've ever seen from a player. So I just don't think that that's a good comparison. I think that's a false equivalency.
I think it's a very apt comparison.
No, you don't. You can't have Embiid outside your top 50 and then also say he's the same as Akeem in 94, 95. And you
Well, I'm
can't
just
say
saying,
Embiid's teams
people
never
could
got it done in the
argue
playoffs,
Embiid-
but it's the same as joining a reigning champ. That's not the same thing.
So why are we being critical? Clyde got the job done. Clyde got the ring. Like,
Well, this is what I'm saying. I don't think that's a good way to view basketball careers. To say, oh, this guy was in a situation where his flaws could be covered up for because he had a better team, because he had the best player in the world alongside him.
That's all my argument is that he pulled his weight.
Sure, dude, and James Harden pulled his weight a number of times as the number 1, and the team around him wasn't good enough to get it done. I like Clyde Drexler. I just think the way that
Clyde's
you're viewing
teams were
this
good enough to
game
get it done at their apex. I think they were good teams, but I think they were always going to run into the buzzsaw that was Chicago, right?
The fact that James Harden in 2018, and I give a lot of credit to Chris Paul too, but that team winning 65 games is clearly more impressive than anything that Clyde did in his career. Like, Clyde led really good teams in Portland, right? I believe they won 62 games one year. They were winning in the high 50s several years in a row, like 90 to 92. But again, look at the success they had with him off the court and look at the talent around him. Like, those were really good basketball teams. So you're just not going to get me to agree that because Clyde was the second best guy and played pretty well in a title run, that means he's better than James Harden, who in 2019 played like a top 3 to 5 player in the world in the playoffs, and in 2020 did the same, and in 2018 did the same. Like, I just don't agree with that thinking. James Harden was better at his peak. He has better longevity. He's a better basketball player, had a better career. Clyde Drexler was fortunate to be paired up with Akeem Olajuwon and get a ring because of that. And I like Clyde. Again, I just don't like what you're doing to Jimmy Harden. But in my 39 spot, I have another shooting guard of this era. This is where I have Reggie Miller, who, as you hinted at last episode, I am quite high on, and I do think is sold terribly short when people just look at accolades with him or when they just look at the counting stats, because I think people do that a lot with Reggie. It's interesting. I kind of think like there's the legend of Reggie, there's the choke sign, there's the 8 points in 9 seconds. Like, there's all these things that make him an icon and make him feel so huge. And then there are people who will look and say, oh, he's only a 5-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA. He only averaged 18, 3, and 3. Like, he couldn't have been that good. In reality, I do think he belongs in the top 40 players of all time, but not necessarily because of like the big playoff moments, although great playoff scoring, great playoff performance is a big part of his case here. It's more just the fact that he was such an elite offensive engine in a way that isn't going to show up in the box score. And It was his scoring threat that fueled great team offense for a long time. 1990 to 2000, he led 9 top 8 offenses, 2 number 1 offenses, but he didn't do it through crazy volume scoring in the regular season. He wasn't a volume playmaker. He did it by being one of the most efficient volume scorers in NBA history. Plus 8% relative true shooting over his entire career is absolutely ridiculous. And essentially, he's probably the greatest off-ball mover and is absolutely one of the 2 greatest off-ball scoring shooting threats in NBA history. It's just him and Steph Curry in a class of their own when it comes to that constant movement, that constant gravity, that ability to stress the defense at all times with their shooting threat and their movement. Like, I am always amazed by Reggie's ability to set up his man when it comes to working with an off-ball screen, to read the off-ball screen so well, and to constantly spring free, get separation if it's getting out above the three-point line, if it's getting to the mid-range, or if it's beating an overplay and getting a little backdoor cut. Like, the guy was just an absolute master at that aspect of the game. And so you pair that ungodly movement shooting with the motor and the feel as an off-ball mover, with the ridiculous floater game and ridiculous mid-range shooting he had, with the elite foul drawing ability and the elite craft that he had as a scorer. Like, that is one of Reggie's most incredible abilities. The fact that even though he wasn't somebody who put a lot of pressure on the basket, he's still producing like a 0.5 free throw rate in a number of these years. And at the same time, he's the most efficient volume jump shooter in the NBA. Like, it's just incredible what he sustained for as long as he did. And you just kind of need to fundamentally think about why it's so much harder to guard a team with Reggie Miller on it. It's because he is forcing you to make a million different decisions because he's constantly moving off ball. He's forcing you to worry about his scoring threat constantly. He is forcing you to stay attached to him, stay hugged tight every time that one of his teammates has the ball. And so they have better driving opportunities. It is that impact that he has on every possession, even if he doesn't ever touch the ball, right? We always talk about this with Steph, but outside of him, Reggie is the best ever at doing all of that stuff. And so that skill set, that gravity, that spacing value enhanced everybody around him, and it would enhance any offense dramatically. And he was so efficient, and that's why even just being a solid passer and a decent ball handler and a decent athlete, he made his team offenses so much better, and he made them so good for so long. And then there is the fact that he is a massive playoff riser. Like, from 1990 to 2002 in the playoffs, Reggie Miller gave you 23.5 points per game on plus 8% relative true shooting. Like, that is a remarkable accomplishment.
Bonkers, bro.
For your volume to go up, for your efficiency to stay the same when you're already one of the most efficient scorers in NBA history, like, that is such a historically rare thing. And he led the best playoff offense in the NBA in 1999 and 2000, which is when he had the best team around him. But his impact was still like flat out all NBA level at that time. And that's where I think his longevity is such a strong point in his case. From the day that he entered the league until the day he left, he was still a very impactful offensive player. It's 18 years of strong offensive impact, 13 years of flat out stardom, and at 34 years old, he was the best player on a finals team and the best offense in the NBA. Between his 35 and 36-year-old postseasons, he averaged 27 points per game on plus 10% relative true shooting. Like, his skill set was built in a lab to age beautifully, and my God, did it. So I really don't have many criticisms of Reggie other than, I guess, the lack of impact beyond his scoring and scoring threat. But I want to emphasize scoring threat because that is essentially playmaking value, right? It's making his teammates better. It's making their lives easier, even though he's not racking up, obviously, big assist numbers. And then other than that, he's just a decent defender, pretty poor rebounder for the position. So those, I think, are the limitations with Reggie that everybody knows about. And he's still not reaching like the top heights of offensive impact in NBA history and doesn't have a super strong peak. He doesn't have a peak where he's like a top 3 player on the planet, but top 10, top 15 for 13 years, absolutely. He was a scoring machine who got better in the playoffs in a truly unique way in NBA history and led a bunch of team offenses that were really good that he made substantially better for a long time. So you put all that together, and I just think Reggie has to be in the top 40.
I mean, I had Reggie on our 50 to 41 episode. I like this ranking for Reggie. I mean, I think, like you said, dude, I think the biggest selling point's his longevity and the fact that I really think Reggie is one of those guys that you drop him anywhere and he just enhances everybody around him. Like, he is one of the most, plug-and-play players in NBA history. He doesn't... That's such rare value. You know what I mean? Like, it's... I want to say unparalleled. It's not completely unparalleled, but it's very unique and very rare. And he's one of the few players in NBA history that you can say that for. And he's one of the guys atop that list that anywhere, any situation, any team, you're going to feel his impact.
Absolutely. And he wound up being the best player on a lot of really good teams, but he is somebody who it's so easy to envision being the second best player on like some of the greatest offenses ever, right? I mean, if you put him alongside a truly great paint scoring presence, like a great downhill force, what Reggie would have done to make that guy's life better would have just been so massively impactful. But he ended up being the guy, and he did a really good job as the guy. And again, I mean, he worked alongside so many different supporting casts over that 18-year career. And even in the only years of his career in which we have offensive on-off specifically on Data Baller, it's just the last 5 years of his career, right? When he's already in his mid-late 30s, still more than a +5 offensive on-off. Like, just still really significant offensive impact. And I wish that we had, honestly, the play-by-play data for his entire career. I'd love to see his mid-range numbers. I'd love to see his career on off splits, because I do think that all that stuff with Reggie would just be crazy impressive. But really awesome player for a really long time. So who is in your 38 spot, Logan?
I know that this guy has already been on your list too. This is where I ended up putting Bill Walton, and I know that it's basically one playoff run, like 3-4 healthy seasons. I understand that, but I just think Bill Walton has one of the most incredible winning skill sets in NBA history, and I think that specifically for the time period that he played in, it's one of the most valuable skill sets that you could have. Like, Bill was a super impactful and one of the greatest college players of all time. And so he came into the league and was really, really polished. And again, I just think for this time period, his defense, like what he was able to do on that side of the ball, I think obviously that's his number one skill set, the caliber of rim protector he was. 77, he leads the league in blocks at 3.2 in the playoffs. He's giving you 4.5 stocks per game. Oh, wow. 18 points per game efficiently, over 50% in the regular season and the playoffs. You add on top of that, he's one of these early kind of impactful post hubs, 5.5 assists per game in the playoffs in 77, and he's arguably the league's best rebounder, 14 a game in the regular season, leading the league, 15 in the playoffs. Like, I just feel like this version of Bill, you could drop on any team, and he's one of the league's best players. He's got a versatile, impactful game, and he does it in so many different ways. Again, as a rim protector, as a playmaker, as a scorer, as a rebounder. I just think it's such a perfect winning skill set for the era that he played in. And I get that, I've held Embiid's injuries against him. For Bill, one, it is the fact that he's got one healthy postseason. He got the job done, but it's also, I don't hold it against Bill that we didn't have the medical technology that we do now to where he could have played more. Like, I'm not saying that I don't think that
makes any sense. What?
He'd be more impactful. It's just like, if you had a knee injury back then, you're just going to be done. Like, I think that's inherent.
Well, it was his feet, but also I don't understand how that makes any sense. I'm going to be honest. Like, a player being hurt is a player being hurt. It's never their fault, but the result is the same. They're not on the court. They can't impact the game.
I'm just not holding the fact that Bill's career was done after this because
you like Bill Walton and you don't like Joel Embiid.
It's just kind of unfeasible that a guy that got injured with the kind of injury that Bill had back then, that he would continue playing. I mean, and he did. He ended up playing with the Celtics, but...
Okay, if my criteria is who gives me the best chance to win the most championships if they're on my team over the course of their career, right? That has nothing to do with, oh man, like, it's unfortunate they didn't have the medical science, technology, whatever, to help Bill overcome his problems. Like, he wasn't on the court. It's never a player's fault when they're hurt, but the reality is they're not on the court. I just don't understand how that has any relevance to his all-time ranking. It's unfortunate, absolutely. It's always unfortunate when a player gets hurt, though.
I'm just saying for this time period, like, that's a factor in why guys aren't bouncing back. You know, Gale Sayers had one good year in his career and was done after that because we just didn't have the medical technology to rehabilitate him and get back on the field.
Yeah, it sucks. But why does that have any impact on their all-time ranking? It shouldn't.
The same way that Bill wasn't going to ever come back and be the same player that he could be.
And so Bill Walton had the career that he had. He had the career that he had in that time. And it is so unfortunate. It's one of the most tragic careers in NBA history. And it's the reality of what happened. I don't think he should get hypothetical bonus points for, oh, he would have been healthier. He would have played longer. You said he did. You said you don't hold it against his career, his resume.
It didn't exist for him to come back and rehabilitate and be the player that he could have been.
But why did you say you don't hold it against him, but you hold it against other players?
It's the era. Like, it's not feasible for a guy that sustained the kind of major injury that he did as for any player that got injured in this time period.
Yeah, bro, but it's like if you died of the plague in the 1500s, you still died of the plague, you know? It's like, yeah, tough luck in your era. It sucks. But it's the reality.
I'm saying that's why it's unreasonable to have expected Bill Walton to have come back and been the player that he was after the injury.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Because we just didn't have the technology for him to bounce back from that.
Yeah, but I don't know why you're making it so much about technology. Like, some people just have debilitating, crippling injuries. I don't know that Bill Walton would have been any healthier today. He had terrible feet problems.
I agree.
That's a terrible, terrible thing for a 7-footer to have at any time in human history.
And it's a genetic thing. I agree with that. I'm just saying that, like, that's why he didn't. We just didn't have, guys didn't do that. You know, Neek was the first guy that had like a major injury like that and bounced back and was still, you know, he wasn't the same player that he was because he lost athleticism, but he came back from that.
But an Achilles is still different from chronic feet injuries as a 7-footer. I don't know. Like, I just think you're going into hypotheticals here that don't make any sense to me. I just think, like, the reality is Bill Walton is one of the most talented players ever, one of the highest peaks ever, and also the single most injury-riddled career of any great player in NBA history. And I would just keep it that simple because that's what happened.
I just think that context is important with Bill. Anyways,
yes.
I think if you give me Bill in the 1970s, a season or two, I'm winning a chip. I think he had one of the most valuable skill sets for this period in basketball history. He's extremely versatile, extremely impactful. It's the skill set. It is the skill set in the era. I think Bill Walton is one of the most perfect players that you could have in the 70s, and you give me a season or two of Bill, I think we come away with the championship.
I pretty much agree, and that's why I had him at number 46, even though you really only do get 2 truly great seasons out of him. And in 1978, I mean, you don't even get him to finish that season fully healthy, but it's one of the greatest 2-season runs, one of the greatest 2-year peaks in NBA history, like arguably top 15. And so I don't think I really need to reiterate what you said, but one of the greatest passing bigs ever, one of the greatest defenders in NBA history, and far and away the best player on both sides of the ball for a team that was probably both the best offense and defense in the NBA at this time. The couple numbers that I will recite, just because they are so remarkable, is that over these 2 years, the Blazers were 92-31 with Bill Walton. They were 15-26 without him. They were by far the best team in the league when he played. They were flat out bad, way below average when he did not. In full games he played, they had a plus 16 net rating. That's like GOAT level team stuff. In games that he missed, they had a -5 net rating. Once again, very bad team. That's a plus 20.5 point net swing in games that Walton played versus games that he didn't. I think that alone tells you how monstrous his impact was at his peak. The thing that's tough for me and the reason that I'm a little bit lower on him is I come back to my criteria, and it's okay if you're on my team for your career, Bill Walton. Yeah, you give me a great chance to win a championship in the 2 years that you are peak Bill Walton. And other than that, I'm just getting very little. And if I compare that to guys who are giving me, like Reggie Miller, right? 13 years of star level impact and then another handful of years of just like quality production, it's tough for me to say I think Bill Walton overall gives me the better chance. There's a line, and I do think, like you're saying, he's so great at his best that he belongs in the top 50. I think I just overall in this list am valuing longevity more than you are. And Bill Walton has, unfortunately, some of the worst longevity in NBA history, but I really couldn't be higher on the peak. I think he just is an unbelievable player. In my 38 spot, I have somebody who you already talked about last episode, and he was in your 50 spot, actually. He started off this whole saga. This is where I have Jason Kidd. And his offensive game is flawed, deeply flawed, but he's still a strong offensive floor raiser. The real strength of Jason Kidd, though, is that he's probably the greatest defensive guard in NBA history. I would give him that designation. He was an absolute monster on the defensive end and famously transformed the Nets from the number 23 defense in the NBA to the number 1 defense in his first year there. Elite size as like a legit 6'4" guard with a 6'8" wingspan, strong frame, fantastic hands, great anticipation, strong and really good at defending athletic guards and big wings. He was an elite rebounder for his position, like just absolutely sensational defensive guard. And offensively, in the Nets years, had a plus 9.2 offensive on-off swing. So even though his scoring left a lot to be desired when you're comparing him to other great guards, 43% in his career on two-pointers, didn't get to the line much, generally just a limited half-court scorer, couldn't consistently shoot the three until like 2005. Throughout his career, inefficient scorer, minus 3% relative true shooting, took some shots that I didn't like and ultimately just didn't have a good scoring game, especially in the half court. But his transition ability and his elite playmaking as one of the greatest passers we've ever seen, a rim assist machine, somebody who had insane creativity and variety in terms of the delivery and so many passing angles available to him at his size and outstanding vision. Like, he was still able to make those offenses way better. He only got them to be a slightly above average offense when he was on the court, but they were disastrous offensively when he was off the court. And so that combination of I am probably the best defensive guard ever, and I am also somebody who can do heavy lifting and like real offensive floor raising, it allowed him to be the best player on some really good teams that he made way better. And we come back to his first season with the Nets because it's such great evidence of his impact. He joined a 26-win team. They double their win total. They improve by 4 points in terms of offensive rating, by 6 points in terms of defensive rating when Kidd joins the team. And the Suns, who he had previously led to 50 wins the year before, they fall off in his absence. Their defense gets way worse over the course of his career with the Suns. Again, you see massive differences in performance when Kidd plays versus when he doesn't. They won 65% of their games with him, just 39% of their games without him. And in the Nets years, it's the same story. 58% win rate with him, 32% win rate without him. Like, that unique two-way value just made teams way better. And then I do think another really strong point in Kidd's case, on top of the peak that is pretty strong. I mean, it's not like the strongest out there, but he did make a legit MVP case in 2002, so you can't overlook that. The ability to make significant contributions to a champion in a scaled down role, like what he did with the 2011 Mavs at 37 years old, it does matter to me that he could still be an elite defender, a strong playmaker, a good three-point shooter at that time. Like, yes, absolutely, there's some good luck involved that he was on a team that was good enough to win the title, but it still matters to me that like the impact translated for as long as it did with Jason Kidd. And so the fact that he's giving you, I mean, like 17 real quality seasons and more than a decade of like all NBA level impact, that's pretty compelling to me. So I do have Jason Kidd in my top 40 at number 38.
Yeah, I think this makes sense. I mean, kids, and I do think he deserves credit for that transformation. I mean, developing a jump shot late in his career. I think that context is really important to Kid's case being this high. The fact that he did sustain it for so long, and he proved that across contexts and across different roles as a player that he always provided that winning value. And it just makes sense mentally with his skill set. All-time defender, all-time playmaker, one of the smartest guys on the court. And the three-point shot was vital to him extending his career like it is for a lot of players, developing that jump shooting late in their career. And he was really high level for a long time. I mean, I love going back and watching Jason Kidd on the court, man. He's one of the most fun players to me to go back and watch. So I think this makes sense for Kidd.
Ugly score, but pretty much amazing at everything else. And so that's where I can live with the scoring limitations, live with the subpar efficiency, because I just think the impact speaks for itself with him. Very unique player, but belongs in the top 40. Who do you have at number 37, Logan?
All right, I think I might make you blow a gasket here.
Okay, I'm ready.
I apologize in advance.
Okay.
I know this guy isn't on your list because you mentioned it in our honorable mentions that he was not here. Really, with the other active players that I included on this list, I just wanted to have this guy here. I have Jayson Tatum in my 37 spot, and I know it may seem like early for Tatum. I just think that he has such a winning and versatile skill set. He just can do everything out there on the court for me. Like, I just think Tatum is one of the winners of this generation. I think that he does leave something to be desired. The scoring translating in multiple of their playoff runs, it's been ugly, right? Like, you think about him in the Warriors finals and letting the Celtics down when they needed him to step up. The championship that they win is with an all-time basketball team. But I just think Tatum was the best player on both of those squads. I think he's been in a top 5 to top 10 kind of player for half a decade now, and it's the versatility and the impact. Like, I think this guy is one of the best defenders and most versatile defenders in the NBA. And the thing that made this hard for me about Tatum is, and I'm not doing any projecting with this, but I do wonder what he's going to look like long-term coming back from this injury, and it is a thing that I'm concerned about, just with what he looks like exactly moving forward. But he's so well-rounded. The defense, the playmaking, the rebounding, the scoring. Tatum, to me, is just so versatile, so impactful, and I think he's gotten a lot better, right, over these past few seasons where he's actually reached this star-level impact. But he's just so versatile in so many different ways, and he's just a winning basketball player. Like, I just, when I thought about some of the other inclusions of players that I made on this list, Tatum's just a guy that I want on my squad. And, yeah, I mean, that's it. Tatum has such a winning skill set to me in the modern era, and I just think some of the other modern players that I have higher on my list, I don't think Tatum's skill set sticks out in a way that doesn't belong on this list. So I know it's early. I know that Tatum and some of these other active guys that I do have higher on my list aren't done, and the longevity may surpass them of other guys here, but I just really value Tatum's skill set.
I like Tatum a lot. It's just too soon. You could argue him in like the 50 spot. I just don't think you can argue him up into the top 40. Maybe this is just a difference in criteria, but when I think about my criteria, like, the peak is just not high enough with Tatum, right? Like, I think at his best, he's the 5th best player in the NBA. And I think he generally, over the course of the 2020s, hovered more in like the 7th to 10th best player in the NBA kind of range. Really good. I would agree, the most versatile player in the NBA, but also like did have some limitations, some issues that the roster around him was able to compensate for when it comes to some of his scoring inconsistencies. If you look at that 2024 run and him having a very down 3-point shooting run, and he was still awesome as a rebounder, as a defender, as a playmaker, and I actually thought should have won Finals MVP. But I also think this is where it comes back to like, oh, he's a champion. Well, you do have to consider the context of that championship team being, in my opinion, one of the most talented top sixes that we've seen in NBA history, and having a lot of other guys who made a pronounced impact on the game and could pick up the slack when Jayson Tatum was down. I think he's a super impactful player. I also think he's played on a lot of really talented teams throughout his career. And I don't think as an individual force has been at the level where when you're talking about at this point 6 all NBA level seasons out of the guy, like it's just not enough. If they were 6 like top 3 absolutely carrying teams to being elite on his own merits, then I could have Tatum here. But again, this is where I just think like I had Luka down at 47. And so I do think that Luka's just peaked higher than Tatum, and they have similar like longevity, I guess is what you would call it at this point. So it's just not enough yet for Tatum to be on my list.
I mean, I agree that Luka's better. Tatum, when I imagine in my head, when I think about like, and I get it. I think that we are disagreeing on some of the longevity stuff a little bit here, and that's a big discrepancy in our list. But like, I value Tatum's skill set so much, man. I think like, I know that like the scoring isn't what it's needed to be in some of these playoff runs. I just think he provides you value in so many different ways. The guy is an elite rebounder. He's a versatile defender. He is
no doubt,
a legitimately awesome playmaker and decision maker now. And maybe this is early. Maybe this is early for him. Like, I completely understand that, but I love Tatum, man. I love watching him play basketball. And he just, like I said, he's a guy I want on my team. I think he is going to help. If he's scoring the ball efficiently or not, he is going to help me win basketball games.
Tatum rocks. I fully expect and hope that he will be in my top 40 someday. But when I've gotten a decade more out of Reggie Miller, I've gotten a decade more out of Ray Allen, a decade more out of Paul Pierce, like there's just no way that the gap in peak makes up for the gap in longevity when I think about my criteria there. So that's why I don't have Tatum in my top 50, even though I really like the guy. Speaking of longevity, in my 37 spot, Logan, I have little Johnny Stockton. Yeah, are you surprised? I mean, it's definitely lower than almost everybody else would have him, but I'm not very high on Stockton. He's not my guy.
I don't have Stockton on my list, so.
Holy shit. He didn't even get an honorable mention?
It's Stockton, man. Like, Stockton's cool. I think Stockton's cool.
I'm glad you think he's cool. I actually don't think he's
a dick. He's
cool.
actually kind of a dick, yeah.
He definitely didn't believe in the vaccines or any of that stuff, and he was definitely pretty dirty on the court, but he was also definitely very good for a very long time. I just don't know how you could keep Stockton out of the top 50, man. When I think about my criteria, when I think about impact over a career, guys who gave me a good chance to win a title, like, my God, I mean, Stockton certainly contributed to his team having a bunch of chances. And did they win one? No, but they did have the most prolonged run of team success that didn't result in the title in NBA history. And he was a huge part of that. He's not their best player. Karl Malone is their best player, but there are just so many things that he did that positively contributed to winning. He was a strong defender. He was a very good passer, a bit overrated as a passer, in my opinion, a bit overrated as a playmaker, but nevertheless, a very good passer, like a top 10 passer in NBA history, super efficient scorer, and so valuable in the possession game. Like the fact that he kept turnovers pretty low, especially for how much he had the ball, and was a steals machine on the other end, that's valuable. Great screener for a guard. So like we talk about the little things, and that's where I do think Stockton really stands out. Like he was a king of the little things. And defensively, great quickness, great hands, super physical for his size, great positioning, good fundamentals, like made the absolute most out of what he had. Now, maybe some people who are particularly fond of him overrate his defense. Like the reality is he was limited by his size, but he is one of the better small guard defenders in NBA history for sure. And he did make a clear positive impact on that side of the ball. And then Offensively, I do think he's one of the great game managers that we've seen. Now, I'm not as high on Stockton's offense as some because I don't think he was somebody who really stressed a defense, especially as you get later into his career. I do think when you're talking about his athletic peak, like when he was at his quickest in the early 90s and he was really good getting out in transition, then he was just a little bit better and more imposing as a scorer. But the thing with Stockton is I do think he had a pretty idle approach to offense. I do think his job was largely just to execute, just to get the ball to people in their spots. And I think Jerry Sloan designed a brilliant offense and Stockton played with a lot of really good offensive talent. So he was an important part of the offenses, but was he the driving force? No, I wouldn't say that. And that's where I really get annoyed when people are like, oh, what's the difference between Stockton and Steve Nash? It's like, well, Steve Nash was the driving force of some of the greatest offenses in NBA history, and he was a different level as a playmaker, and he was a different level as a scorer. He did have a takeover gear as a scorer that Steve Nash could get to if you showed him those coverages. John Stockton just did not have that gear. He didn't have that sort of dynamism as a scorer at all.
Even in Nash's older years at his peak with Phoenix, he still had that.
It's like what Nash did for half of that series against Dallas in 05, where he's dropping 40 points per game. There was not a world in which John Stockton could ever have done anything like that. Like, his job was take open shots, take good shots, make a high percentage of those shots, get the ball to people in their spots. But Karl Malone's scoring was the most valuable aspect of the Jazz offenses being what they were. And like, the Jazz offenses actually really weren't that good until Malone became a really elite scorer. And especially, I mean, they start being like top 5 offenses once Jeff Hornacek comes into the fold. And I always think he's the most underrated part of the equation. So that's where it's just like, if you're comparing Stockton to other great offensive guards, even like an Isiah Thomas, I would say Isiah Thomas absolutely had a higher offensive peak. He was somebody who did more to stress a defense for sure. He wasn't as efficient, but he was an actual offensive engine, whereas Stockton was more of a really good supporting piece offensively, but he was still a really good supporting piece offensively. He was a really good shooter. He was a great passer, good screener, all these things, good in the possession game. And I think the biggest thing, the reason why I just think you have to have him on this list is the ridiculous availability and consistency and longevity. He gave you 16 years of at least strong starter value in which he was going to be on the court every single game, making you noticeably better as a basketball team. Just for the years that we have the on-off data, which is 97 to 03, so that's really the tail end of his career, he's got a plus 11 on-off swing. So you talk about impact showing up there. That's pretty significant. I just think there's no question that he made a pronounced impact on the game. He did it in some quiet ways, but he did it so consistently for so long that the overall career impact to me has to be top 40.
So the longevity is why he's over a guy like Zeke to you?
Yes, the longevity. The fact that he basically gives me twice as many good years is the difference. Like, that just means so much to me. I think there are a number of guards. I mean, I think that Kevin Johnson peaked higher than John Stockton. I think Penny Hardaway peaked higher than John Stockton. Like, we can go through guys of that time who I think, oh, their 3 best years are better. Little Johnny Stockton gave me almost 2 decades of just being a really good basketball player. And that's a very, very rare thing in NBA history.
It is. For me, it is just the peak. Like, not that I didn't consider Stockton, but like when I was just thinking about the apex of some of these other guys, I didn't think Stockton was quite there. So, I mean, he would be an honorable mention for me, but I just don't think his peak was as high as some of these other guys.
Definitely. I mean, his peak, off the top of my head, might be the lowest of anybody in my top 50. Because his case is the most predicated upon the longevity, but he is still a guy who, again, for a long time was a top 10-ish, top 15-ish player, like for a long time. So I guess I don't really need to lay out the criticisms of Stockton because, I mean, you're probably the lowest guy on him on the face of the earth. I will do it, though. So again, it comes down to the lack of a high-level scoring threat to leverage. The fact that he wasn't aggressive offensively. He had some serious issues finishing at the rim in any traffic because he was so small. He wasn't a dynamic off-the-dribble shooter. He was an efficient jump shooter, but he wasn't, again, like Nash, where he's just like twisting and turning the defense and manipulating them at such a high level, and he can score so quickly and so efficiently at volume in so many different ways. Like, that's not how John Stockton played offense, especially in the half court. There was a lot of waiting for the action to develop, then making a pretty routine pass. He wasn't carving up warping defenses. And I already mentioned this, but just to be more specific, in a decade before Hornacek, Stockton only led one top 5 offense. And actually the Jazz offenses of the late 80s were straight up below average. It was really Mark Eaton and the defenses that were making them an above average team at that point. And so, like I said, I think of him as like an excellent game manager who needs a lot of help offensively. Like 1990, Karl Malone becomes a crazy efficient 31 point per game scorer. That's when the Jazz post their first top 10 offense. Then you add Hornacek in 94. That's when the team takes a leap and they become, again, a top 5 offense consistently. Malone's passing gets better, and that's when the offenses peak for the Jazz. It's not when Stockton was at his best, right? The best Jazz offenses are in the late 90s. When Malone was at his best, Stockton was not
Hornacek,
at that
like
point.
You mentioned. Yeah.
And Hornacek as well. So Stockton just wasn't the needle mover for an elite team offense, is my point. But still, to be a very good defender and a very good supporting offensive player for so long, like, even though I'm not high on his peak, the longevity is just insane. Although I will say, one more little criticism on Stockton, his scoring issues did show up in the playoffs, where his efficiency drops, his true shooting drops by 4%, and the Jazz offenses weren't as good. They actually had more below average playoff offenses than they had top 3 playoff offenses. Now, put a lot of that on old Karl Malone, not quite being the same in the playoffs as he was in the regular season, but Stockton wasn't either. And so I don't think he's quite the offensive player that some people make him out to be. I don't think his peak was very high in the scope of these great players, but I still think, man, I think about my criteria. It's just a lot of good years out of Mr. Stockton. So who do you have at 36, Logan?
We've already talked about this guy on the list, and you actually just briefly mentioned him. This is where I have Isiah Thomas on my list.
Okay.
And I do think the context is important, like you mentioned when you brought up Isiah in our first episode. He played on an all-time great team. Those Bad Boys Piston squads are really great units top to bottom with a lot of good players, a Hall of Fame coach. Like, that context is important. That being said, I do think Isiah Thomas was the best player on those teams. They come away with 2 championships. And, you know, I just think that he's one of the greatest playmakers in the game. He was the engine of those offenses. I think the reason those teams were so great more than anything was the elite high-level defenses. But consistently, Zeke is trotting out top 10 level offenses throughout his prime, which I consider to be like 84 to 90-ish. Somewhere in there. And, yeah, I just think Zeke's kind of an underrated rebounder. He's a really good playmaker. The turnover issues, a very high turnover kind of player, but also always had the ball in his hands. And I think, you know, his scoring wasn't always super effective in the playoffs, but enhanced his teammates, an all-time playmaker, the best player on those teams to me. And he's a 2-time champ. Like, I get that the longevity isn't there the way it is with other players, and I understand that knock on him, but I do think his peak is really, really high. And I think, I don't know, man, I was looking at a lot of lists. I think Zeke just kind of gets underrated now. Like, I think that there's a lot of great guards in NBA history. I still think Zeke is a top 10 guard to me, or at least top 10 point guard to me in NBA history, where, I don't know, the positions get muddied with the modern game today. So I don't know who qualifies exactly on certain lists, but I still think Zeke belongs in there. And I don't know, I was looking at a lot of lists before I did this, and I just think Zeke is kind of a little bit underrated at this point. So we've already talked about Zeke. He was in the first episode, but he comes in at my number 36 spot.
I'll try to keep my Zeke stuff quick since I already did my whole spiel on him last episode. I do think when you talk about him being underrated, maybe a little people are too turned off by the efficiency issues because, I mean, he's just flat out got poor scoring efficiency, like -2 relative true shooting in his career. That's a rare thing for a top 50 level player, but I do think it's something that you can live with because of the fact that he was just a whirlwind downhill, and like, somebody is going to have to initiate the offense and threaten the defense and create advantages for their team. And that's what Zeke did. And it helped make him an elite playmaker. And even though, he took some shots that I wouldn't have recommended and his finishing efficiency was limited by his size, like, Nevertheless, he was a guard who lived in the paint, and that was the foundation of a lot of really good offenses. So I do think that Zeke is really good. I had him in my 50 spot. I do think, though, where we're going to disagree is probably in how much you value the 2 championships for him, just because I'm going to be Mr. Context, I guess, for this entire series. I do think it's so important. I think those Pistons teams were so damn good. Dumars was an all-NBA level guy. Rodman was one of the greatest defenders in NBA history. Lambeer had been a 4-time All-Star that decade. Aguirre and Vinnie Johnson were just like really good scorers, and just the number of quality players on that team. You go down to Sally and Edwards and Mahorn. Like, they were just so well built. They were so awesome defensively. They had really good supporting offensive pieces. Zeke was the best player on the team. I do agree with that, but there were also absolutely stretches where Dumar was the best player and Rodman was the most impactful player in a certain matchup. And like, that's where I just think, looking at it as, oh, this guy has a championship, this guy doesn't. It's just not a way that I like to view a team sport, when I think ultimately every championship is very much a collective achievement. And I think that's as true for the Pistons in 1989 and 1990 as just about any team in NBA history. But I do like Zeke. Okay, in my 36th spot, I have a peer of Zeke's, although he peaked a little bit later. I have Patrick Ewing here, and I'm pretty high on Ewing, I think, because to me, he just gets really underrated. Probably because he doesn't have a championship, and probably because in the biggest series of his career, he was bad. But again, this is where, like, for me, obviously playoff performance is super important, but like, when people look at a specific playoff moment and they're like, that guy wasn't good in that game, that guy made that one play, I'm like, I just don't think that's really representative of a player's entire career and like the chance they give me to win championships over their entire career and the total story of their impact. And that's where I think Ewing gets sold short a lot, because he's one of the greatest defenders and defensive anchors in NBA history, who was also a big time scorer at his peak. And that's just a very rare thing, right? I mean, I think some people might even consider some of these like one-way defensive giants, if it's a Dikembe Mutombo, or I don't know, maybe some people would consider Rudy Gobert for the top 50. It's not inconceivable. He's that great defensively. Or an Alonzo Mourning, who had more of a scoring game, but still wasn't nearly the scorer that Ewing is. And it's like, Ewing, I mean, he wasn't Gobert, Mutombo defensively, but he's a tier below that. Like, I think he's a top 20, maybe a top 15 defender in NBA history who anchored 3 straight number 1 defenses, including one of the best defenses ever in 1994 and one of the best defensive runs overall in that period. Like, he was clearly the best defender on some of the best defenses ever. He was a historically great rim protector. He was an elite defensive rebounder. He had underrated agility and athleticism at his peak. And then even after some injuries and even as he got older, I think made up for some of that loss in mobility with his defensive IQ getting better. And so to be that level of a dominant defender, while also from 1990 to 1994, he was averaging 26 points per game on plus 3% relative true shooting and was this highly skilled scoring big with like a really good face-up game and a super legit mid-range jumper at 7 foot, 240 pounds. Like, that defense and scoring combination just means elite impact. And that's what Ewing did for a long time. I mean, from 1986 to 2000, the Knicks were 601 and 438 with him. They won 58% of their games, and they won just 42% of their games without him. They went 67 and 92. That is huge impact. And you have to keep in mind, the Knicks were a disaster when he got there. Like, they were in dire straits. And then with Ewing, they made the playoffs in 13 straight seasons, and he was far and away the biggest reason for that, and ends up with the 11th most playoff wins ever without a ring, and famously gets 1 game from a ring. And it's like, yeah, again, he did not play well in that series against Hakeem and the Rockets, but I keep coming back to the idea of just being like uncomfortable with the absolutes of, oh, that guy couldn't have been the best player on a championship team. It's like Chauncey Billups was the best player on a championship team, right? We see this weird stuff. Teams win with guys who weren't top 5 players. Ewing was at his best a top 5 player. And on top of the 94 finals hurting his legacy, I think the other thing, the stupid thing that legitimately hurts his legacy to this day. the Ewing theory. Just specifically, I think the fact that it is called the Ewing theory, which, by the way, is based on A, Bill Simmons' friend's observation, and B, the 1999 run when Ewing was almost 37 years old and was not even close to his best. So, like, the notion that Patrick Ewing should in any way be the representation of a player, a star whose teams played better with him off the court. Like, it's just so untrue. We have massive amounts of evidence that he made them way better, that he was the driving force and then being as successful as they were. Now, I do still think he's a playoff dropper. I think his scoring blindness was an issue. He was not a good passer, and he was a negative assist-to-turnover ratio guy in the playoffs. Not because he turned it over. He actually didn't turn it over much, just because he was a very limited passer. His scoring efficiency also dipped to slightly below average in the playoffs. So I'm not that high on Ewing's offense. Like, I think the scoring dropped a bit in the playoffs. The passing wasn't very good. The offensive rebounding isn't great for a great big man. And he wasn't like a real play finisher. He was more of an ISO post-up big and skill-based big, which does have an efficiency ceiling, especially if you're not like an Akeem level of artist in that range. So I don't think he was going to be like the best guy on great offenses. But again, I come back to the dudes who I'm talking about. Think about guys like Zoe or Dwight Howard. Like, Ewing was like those guys defensively, but in a different class as a scorer. And if you can be a historic defender and the number one scorer on a team that is damn good every year and falls one game short of a title, like, and you deliver star level impact for a dozen years, you got to have a spot in my top 40. And I think Ewing, like David Robinson is another name who comes to mind, like Kevin Garnett at his best, probably just asked to do too much for his offenses. Probably wasn't meant to be the best guy on a championship offense. Probably was meant to be the second best guy on a championship offense and the best defender on a team that could win a title. And by the way, I'm not saying he's David Robinson. I'm not saying he's Kevin Garnett. He would need more help around him to achieve that formula, but I think he could have done it. I think Ewing was really good for a really long time, and I don't know if that's an obvious theme, but those guys are getting a lot of points on my list. And I'm higher on his peak, much higher on his peak than I am a Stockton, higher on his peak than I am even with Reggie Miller. I think Ewing gave you a unique combination of defense and scoring, especially the defense. And another guy who I just don't think was lucky in his career.
Yeah, and I mean, Ewing did lead the Knicks to the playoffs for like 13 straight seasons, so shout out him for that.
Yeah.
I do think Ewing is probably one of the biggest victims of circumstance in NBA history, just considering the fact that he also played in a time with all of these great centers, like for the entirety of his career, right? If it's Hakeem, if it's David Robinson, if it's Shaq later on, as you're mentioning, if it's Alonzo Mourning, like there's just so many mouths to feed in that department, awards-wise, all-NBA-wise, just perception-wise of where he ranked in the league. And then I do think what you're mentioning with the 94 finals, he did put up 19 points per game on 36% from the field, but John Starks also goes 2 of 18 in a game 7 where the Knicks lose by 6 points. So
a winnable game 7.
You sit here where you're like, damn, man, if John Starks makes 3 to 4 more shots, Patrick Ewing may have a finals MVP, even though he did get dogged and bitched in that series. It looks a little better optically, right, where he is a champ. And so I do think that context is important, and he's got great longevity. All that being said, Patrick Ewing is not on my list.
That doesn't really make sense to me. I'm going to be honest. Ewing's really good, man. And it's like, I don't know, Zeke 15-plus spots above him. I just can't get down with that. Ewing was better than Zeke at his best, and Ewing was that good for longer. The defense is crazy, man. I know how much you value a defensive anchor big. He's one of the best we've seen.
I'm becoming more offense-pilled.
The two-way impact with him really does move me. And by the way, before we move on from Ewing real quick, I just want to touch on the greatest Knick discourse with Jalen Brunson and the Jalen Brunson all-time ranking discourse and all this stuff that I guess we should have seen coming, but like Bill Simmons putting him in the top 40, I did not expect. Like with my criteria, that wouldn't make any sense. Maybe he just has fundamentally different criteria where he doesn't care about longevity like at all. But then he also has Brunson above Luka, which I really don't get because it's like they entered the league at the same time. And I would question if Bill Simmons has ever for a day thought that Jalen Brunson was better than Luka in the moment. And it's like, if not, how can he be above him all time? I don't know. I think it comes down to just like really valuing winning a championship as the best player, which I get because that's the objective of the game, right? You're trying to win championships, but there's just so much context. And it's like, absolutely, Brunson stepped up when he was in the position to get it done, and he was amazing in that game 5. But it's like, who put their team in the position more often where they were just really good? Who impacted the game more overall over the course of their Knicks career? Like, to me, that's obviously Patrick Ewing at this point. Like, it's not even close. So there are people who will say, oh, but Brunson got it done and Ewing didn't. And it's just like, that's just such a black and white way to view this whole thing. When again, there are weird players who have been the best guy on championship teams. If it's Chauncey Billups, if it's Dennis Johnson, and there were many moments in this run when Cat was the best Knick and OG was the best Knick, and like Brunson, amazing clutch player. I would say best scorer in Knicks history, best offensive peak in Knicks history. Like, I would even hear an argument for best peak in Knicks history, but the totality of the contributions, it's like, viewing everything as championship or bust when it's a team accomplishment just doesn't add up to me. And so that's why I would still have Ewing as the GOAT Knick, and I would still have Clyde Frazier as the number 2 Knick, and I don't have Brunson in my top 50. I don't think he has individually delivered top 50 level impact in his career up to this point. I've never seen him as a top 5 player. I think he's got a couple years as a top 10 player. I think he's a really awesome playoff scorer, but like, I don't know. That just seemed like an overreaction to me. A lot of the Brunson stuff all time.
Yeah, I mean, I think we underrated him coming into these playoffs, and I'll
Agreed.
just hand up admit that. Like, I just
Agreed.
think I had him way too low. We love and respect Jalen Brunson here. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think it is kind of outlandish and outrageous. And I don't know, that the Brunson stuff is one of the more toxic, I would say, examples of ring culture when we're talking NBA and historical stuff in basketball. And like, if you want to change the prism of what your argument is, if you want to go clutch scorer all time, oh yeah, like you said, you want to go Knicks peak with Brunson, oh yeah, like we're there, like any of those arguments. But the Luka thing's the craziest one to me, man. Like, I get it, like I have gotten lower on Luka as well, but like, for doing an apples to apples thing, if we dropped Luka in New York, do I think he could have won a title with that team? Yeah, definitely. Like, and I'm not taking away. I don't want to act like I'm taking away from what Jalen Brunson did, but I agree with you fundamentally. Like, I just think that we're kind of, it's a little much right now. Like, even, I don't know, man, top 75, top 100, maybe I would hear an argument or something like that. I do think it's a little sudden for some of the talks that we have thrust Brunson into.
Yeah, I would hear top 75. Top 50, not yet. Top 40 is crazy. And Bill Simmons had him above Steve Nash, which is just absolutely egregious. I believe he did. I believe I saw that when it's like,
wow,
Nash peaked way higher. Nash led many of the very best regular season offenses we've ever seen. And he also led all-time great playoff offenses for a decade, but didn't have the defensive infrastructure around him to win a title, coming out of the strongest conference in NBA history, the West at that time. And now that Brunson did have the team around him and the path lined up, like, he's just better. His entire resume surpasses Steve Nash's. Like, that truly makes no sense to me. That's where, like, I see no criteria that makes any sense, and it's just absolutely blindly valuing a championship, which, once again, is a team accomplishment. It's like the Knicks were plus 16 net in the non-Brunson minutes in these playoffs. That's not to take away from Brunson, because they were great in the Brunson minutes too, but that's to give credit to the guys around him who stepped up in the totality of the contributions they got. And I don't know, like, the entire time I was watching this Knicks team in the playoffs, who obviously overachieved my expectations, totally impressed me. I was wrong about them coming into it. Like, I was thinking the entire time, man, what a collective story this is. This is so much about the depth, the coaching, the fact that they're 1, 2, and 3. It's interchangeable. Who can be the best guy on any given night? And then it's like, because of the clutch heroics and because of Game 5. I mean, the Game 5 performance that Brunson had, it was so legendary. It was so great. But I think it's going to forever distort how this run was viewed, how it should be viewed, because it was not Jalen Brunson and the Brunsonettes. But that game was. And that game is what people are going to remember. And I just don't think that's an accurate depiction of the story. And I just thought some of that stuff was pretty wild. And it's like, I don't know, I see people like, yeah, obviously Knicks fans are going to have way more love for Brunson than Ewing because Brunson got it done. And it's like, man, the 2026 Knicks got it done. Like, Ewing put you in good positions to be a really good team for essentially 15 years. Nobody else in your franchise history has done that. Like, I don't know. People love offense. They love the clutch. They love scoring. Obviously, all that stuff is going to favor Jalen Brunson, but I think being one of the best defenders ever, who was awesome for a really long time and was also a really good scorer. I mean, Patrick Ewing does lead the Knicks in every major all-time category other than assists. Obviously, like, large part of that is just he played there for a long time, but, like, give some credit to bro as a Knicks legend and overall an underappreciated NBA legend in my book. Who do you have at number 35, Logan?
This guy has been mentioned on this episode, and here he is. I'm intrigued to see if he's going to be in your top 30. I think with your criteria, this guy probably will be. This is where I landed on Karl Malone. Admittedly, I did not want to have him on my list because he's a horrible human being. That being said, we have some other horrible human beings on this list.
Yeah.
And like you said to me too, I do want this list to be valid and at least like following basketball history and have some sort of legitimacy to it. And I just couldn't leave Karl out of the top 50 if we're actually going by basketball resume.
I think we slander him enough. I don't think anybody's going to think that we're pro Karl Malone just because we rate him where he belongs as a basketball player historically.
So, yeah, Nasty Man is here at number 35 for me. And I think the biggest thing about Karl Malone is on the basketball court is that he's a playoff dropper. In his prime, he's giving you 27, 11, and 3.5 on 59% true shooting in the regular season. But in the playoffs, his field goal percentage dips by 6%. His true shooting percentage dips by 6%. And I think his efficiency and effectiveness drop for, pretty straightforward reasons. One, I think that the defenses that he took on in the playoffs were just better. I think that you find that he has less easy transition and pick and roll opportunities because teams were more prepared for the Utah offensive attack. And like I said, defenses are just going to get better. You're naturally going to have less of those opportunities when it comes time for the playoffs. I think he was reliant on the free throws, although basically throughout his prime, he drew the same amount of free throws per game in the regular season as he did in the playoffs. I think the biggest reason is just his limitations as a one-on-one scorer and actually having a kind of bag or versatility to his scoring arsenal outside of getting to the rim. All that being said, I do want to give Malone credit on the court for having absurd longevity. I mean, It is kind of crazy when you look back on it. It's 17 straight seasons of 20 or more points per game, always up or at near 82 games played. Like, when you knew what you were getting, and I think that is important for his ranking, and quite frankly, it is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for him being as high as he is on my list. I just couldn't have him below some of the other guys if I thought they peaked higher, whatever it may be. His longevity is absurd. All that being said, I think that I come back to 3 moments in Karl Malone's career that hinder him from being higher on my list. The first is the 1996 Western Conference Finals against Seattle, Game 7 in a game to go to the NBA Finals. The Jazz lose by 4, 90-86. Malone in this game has a true shooting percentage of 40.3%. He goes 8 of 22 from the field, and he misses 6 free throws in this game when Sean Kemp kind of bitched him. And so I think about that. That's a great Seattle team, too. I want that context to be that's an awesome Seattle team. But Malone in a big spot didn't pull his weight. 97 against Chicago in the finals. He's under 24 points per game. He's at 44% from the field. He's at 48.5% true shooting. And in this series, he misses 23 of 58 free throws. That matters to me. I don't feel like he pulled his weight on that stage. 98, honestly, to me, isn't as much on Malone. I put that more on his supporting cast for not pulling their weight. He's still not up to his regular season standard. I do think that's more on his supporting cast, though. And in general, I think he's a little bit overrated because of how he was enhanced by, I think some of the teams get underrated. I think Stockton and Hornacek, guys that we have mentioned, kind of get underrated because of his gaudy numbers.
Well, hold on a second. I don't know if you could be saying Stockton's underrated when you're probably the lowest dude on him on the face of the earth. You just got to become a Hornacek truther to push your anti-Karl Malone and anti-John
It doesn't really have
Stockton
I just think
agendas.
that Stockton fit with what I think they fit each other as basketball players. I do think Stockton enhanced Malone. It doesn't make me look at Stockton individually any different. I think Stockton can kind of get overhyped because of his longevity, but I do think Stockton enhanced Malone. And I think, as we've said about 4 or 5 times throughout this episode, I guess it's a Jeff Hornacek podcast. Jeff Hornacek's going to be top 20. I do think that Hornacek really did matter when they slotted him in as the third guy. But also, he's a horrible human being, so fuck Karl Malone.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be any higher on this list for me than he is. This is about as low as I could go on Nasty Man. He is a playoff dropper. Holy shit, the longevity is incredible with the guy. Yeah. But, again, when I come back to it, in the biggest moments, I think Karl Malone left the Jazz hanging when he didn't deliver. Postman doesn't deliver on Sundays, man. So, I guess I had to have this son of a bitch on my list. He comes in at 35. Fuck you, Karl Malone.
All right. Yeah, he's not going to be on this episode for me. Just way too good for way too long. Just way too many really good seasons. I do appreciate, you really are holding the playoff droppers accountable. A little bit too much, in my opinion. Not giving enough credit for how good they were as overall players. You're holding them accountable, except, of course, for Chris Webber, which I still can't wrap my head around, but we're not going to come back to that.
They got boned. That's a ref thing. That's not a C-Web thing.
Well, him dropping in the playoffs throughout his career,
I don't know what
and dropping from
about,
a
frankly.
place that was not nearly as good as a lot of these other guys is very real throughout
Great
his
shiny
career.
bald head, versatile player, baggy shorts. What's not to like,
Well, great shiny bald head. Yeah, I guess at some points. I like to think of Chris Webber with hair. I do think of Karl Malone as always being bald, but he was just way too good. So, yeah, he's not here for me. I do think, the playoff dropping is real, no doubt about it. Maybe the most memorable play of his career is a turnover. That probably hurts his legacy. But at the end of the day, he was a scoring machine for a really long time. And one of the more complete scoring bigs that we've seen, with the combination of the agility in transition, the bully ball offense in the half court, the foul drawing ability, the mid-post scoring, the jump shooting, the effectiveness as a roll man. Karl Malone at this time could really do everything you wanted from a big as a scorer, outside of not being an elite play finisher around the basket, because he just didn't have great size, right? He was really a power forward. And I think also that limited his effectiveness against some really athletic, huge bigs defensively. And that's an issue he ran into sometimes in the playoffs. So I get the criticisms for sure. I just think you're being a little bit too harsh on Karl Malone, the basketball player, especially given my criteria.
Good clarification.
Yes, well, I want to be very clear about that. This episode is brought to you by Cash App. Guys, my favorite thing about Cash App is that it makes my money work for me. I don't have to think about it. I just know that as long as I direct deposit at least $300 a month and use the Cash App card for purchases, I'm going to earn interest on my savings. So my money's not just sitting there, it's going up, baby.
If you weren't up to speed already, Cash App is way more than just a safe way to send and receive money. With the Cash App card, you unlock a ton of perks without all the hidden fees. Enjoy benefits like exclusive early access to nationwide concert pre-sales, plus discounts on everyday purchases and popular brands you're probably already spending money on. Add your card to your digital wallet to make your money moves easier. Cash App also adds security to your money by declining suspicious card transactions and sending you a notification to make sure the payment is really you. If your card is ever lost or stolen, you can lock it with just one tap right in the app. Spend with confidence with the Cash App card today.
New Cash App customers can earn $10 if they use code CashApp10 in their profile at sign up and send $5 to a friend within 14 days. Terms apply. Cash App is a financial services platform, not a bank. Banking services provided by Cash App's bank partners. Prepaid debit cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. Cash App Visa Debit Flex cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC, and the Bank Corp Bank, N.A. pursuant to a license from Visa USA, Inc. See terms and conditions for the Sutton Prepaid Card, Sutton Debit Flex Card, and Bank Corp Debit Flex Card. Cash App Green features, savings, direct deposit, roundups, overdraft coverage, and discounts provided by Cash App, a Block Inc. brand. Visit cash.app/legal/podcast for full disclosures. In my 35 spot, I have Elgin Baylor, Logan, who has some of the biggest raw counting numbers that you'll ever see. I mean, in his career, in the regular season, 27 points, 13 and a half boards, 4 assists a game on even true shooting percentage, league average efficiency, very similar production in the playoffs. I do think it's important to contextualize the raw numbers with him, though, because of the era in which he played and the fact that the pace was so wild in the 60s. And this applies to Wilt, Oscar Robertson, Jerry West. Like a lot of these guys, the raw numbers are inflated by the fact that their teams were playing so many possessions a game. Elgin Baylor was playing about 100 possessions a game on his own, while modern stars are playing like 75 possessions a game. So there's just a lot more chances to score the basketball. Now, I think you also have to understand it was harder to score the basketball. And so that offsets the difference in pace to some extent. But the thing with Elgin is his scoring efficiency was totally mediocre at the time, while the other elite scorers of the 60s like West and Wilt and Oscar, they were all super efficient by 1960s standards. Elgin was not at all. So he is one of the least efficient volume scorers in NBA history, even relative to his era. He's also the all-time leader in field goal attempts per game, so he's putting up more shots than anybody we've ever seen. So there are some efficiency issues that are significant with him. He was still an awesome player, though. He is one of the guys who I really enjoy going back and watching from this era because the best players of the 60s just pop. I mean, like I've said this before, that's the biggest difference in skill between the best guys and the worst guys and the average guys. Like the best players, you're like, oh man, you can see that guy's just operating at another level.
His athleticism is so ahead of anybody else on the court.
Specifically the aerial athleticism, like the ability to just sky and the hang time was such a valuable thing when it comes to his ability to finish over the top of defenders, shoot over the top of defenders, and he had a variety of finishes he could go to. Like that ability to adjust in the air was so good. So he's a really great slashing forward of this time, elite in transition, and a good passer, which was a unique ability for a forward at that time. I think Rick Barry was the first great passing forward. Elgin Baylor was one of the first good passing forwards. He's also an elite positional rebounder. I mean, one of the best rebounders. And again, the rebound numbers are inflated at this time too. But for being a small forward, absolute monster there, and a solid defender. So I really do think Elgin was very good. The question is just, was he as impactful as the raw numbers would maybe make you think, right? Just the points per game being so massive and the rebound totals being so massive. And I don't think so. I do think Jerry West was by far the best player for the Lakers. Like, I think people look at it as those two together. And obviously, I mean, it was the two of them for a lot of their runs, but like they became an elite offense because of Jerry West. In the years before West, when Elgin was just sort of carrying the team himself, like they were bad offenses. In fact, they had the worst offense in the NBA the year before Jerry West joined. That was only a couple years, but if you just look at over the course of Elgin's career, the Lakers won 56% of their games with him. And when Jerry West played in games without Elgin Baylor, they won 56% of their games. And that's actually a large sample size. That's a 99-game sample size. And that's just 1959 to 1970, actually. So that does not include 71 and 72 when the Lakers were, in 1972, one of the greatest teams ever. And Elgin actually retired in that season. So as a point of comparison, when Elgin played without Jerry West in the years that they were teammates, the Lakers only won 46% of their games. And in the 2 years before West joined the team, when it was just Elgin, he only won 40% of his games. So again, it is very notable to me looking at when the Lakers offenses were at their best and how directly it was tied to Jerry West being at his best. And also, I do think it's significant to point out that the Lakers had their most dominant team immediately after Elgin retired in 1972. Not to say, oh, Elgin was holding them back, just to say the offenses were much more fueled by Jerry West and his hyper-efficient scoring at massive volume and his brilliant playmaking. And he was just a better all-around offensive player. Like, Elgin did have poor efficiency for a star, and his playmaking was solid. But it wasn't a formula for elite offensive impact. Like, there was a level of impact he could have through volume, but when it comes to the refinements that lead to the upper echelons of NBA offense as the best guy, I just think Baylor had some significant flaws that held him back from ever being that. And so with the defense just being okay, with the longevity just being okay, only 846 career games. And I do think it's notable that 1965 significant knee injury hurts his effectiveness towards the end of his career. He came back reasonably well, but just couldn't play for that long. And I think that's a significant component in it. I think Elgin is somebody who I've gotten lower on with time. Like, I have an appreciation for him for sure, but when it comes to the impact over the course of a career, I can't really see the angle for him in the top 30. And it's like, yeah, the Lakers made a lot of finals, but I give most of the credit to that for Jerry West. And also sometimes when they made the finals, they weren't actually that good. It was just the West was weak, and then they went and they kind of got taken care of by the Celtics. But it was West who was the best regular season player, West who was the best playoff player, did it for longer. And like, obviously, I think everybody's going to have West above Baylor, but I do think the gap is pretty big and bigger than some people make it out to be.
I mean, this flows really nicely because I have Elgin here in my 34 spot.
Beautiful.
I think you make some great points. That being said, I do think that the reason he is this high up for me is the gap between kind of what I was saying about Bill Walton in the 70s. Not exactly, but I do think that the gap between Elgin and like the baseline for the average player back then, it is big enough to me to have him up this high. And he's got not incredible longevity, but compared to some of the other players in this range, I think you could make an argument, well, at least for me. I don't know who's up higher on your list. For me, at least, the peak longevity of some of these other guys that are in this range, to me, I think you could make an argument for Elgin to be slightly higher, but I've got Elgin here at 34. And specifically, one other guy,
yeah,
I really debated. They're almost peers of one another, and the circumstances made me wonder if I should have Elgin above the guy that's one spot above him. Ultimately, I went with the guy with the better resume and the so easily translatable winning skill set. When we get to him, I'll reveal who it is, but that's why I had Elgin at 34.
Yeah, the low efficiency scoring wing is just not an archetype that I think has really driven winning over the course of NBA history. Like, I think some of the most overrated players ever are guys who fall into that mold. If it's Carmelo Anthony, if it's Dominique Wilkins. And I don't want to put Elgin into that group because I think he's better. I think he was at least a good passer. He was a really good rebounder. He was a solid defender, but ultimately he did still have that sort of same essential archetype. And that's where I do think you see that the Lakers, in his absence, they were able to replace some of that high volume but low efficiency scoring. They didn't miss him defensively, and so they just didn't really miss a beat without him over the course of his career. Like, more often than not, that was the case. And so that's where I give credit to the resume that he had, but I don't think the impact was there for him to be higher than this for me. And I do think, I mean, the point that you're making about him standing out so much versus the competition, it's an interesting one. And I think this is sort of like a two-sided conversation with the 1960s, where it's like, absolutely, the top tier does stand out in a big way. And I do believe that you judge people relative to competition, but it also does make sense that that would be the case because the NBA was still like pretty much in its nascent stage. And so, of course, there wasn't the same depth of talent. And ultimately, he's not in the tier with West and Oscar and Wilt and Russell. Like, those are the four players to me who really dominated and dictated that decade. Oscar as the best offensive engine, Russell as the best defensive anchor in NBA history, Wilt speaks for itself, just a monumental talent. Jerry West, one of the great scorers, great offensive players ever, who was also a really good defensive guard. Like, those are the four guys, and then Elgin falls a tier below that in terms of the impact. I have another Laker in my 34 spot, Logan. I think we consider him a Laker. This is where I have Anthony Davis.
Ooh.
Is he on your list?
Yeah, Anthony, I'm just surprised.
Okay.
I'm damn. I don't know. I just know how high you're on AD, and I actually don't have AD in this episode.
Interesting.
We're not that far off from one another in the grand scheme of this list, but I guess I'm just surprised that I don't know. I end up having Anthony Davis higher than you. There is a very similar theme for everybody that we're about to talk in this next range about. Okay. But I'm just surprised. I thought AD was going to be in your top 30.
You know, man, I find myself being, well, especially compared to you, pretty longevity pilled on this list. And I think that's the knock on AD. It's more so availability. He's played 807 games over 14 years. That's just 71% of all possible games. And the other thing with Anthony Davis that I would point out is I am extremely high on 2020 Anthony Davis specifically, and 2017 to 2020 AD overall was just such a monster. That combination of volume, scoring efficiency was some of the best defense we've ever seen. However, his consistency year to year has not been the best when we're talking about this level of player, and so that's where I wind up on him down at number 34. And also, he is an unremarkable floor raiser, but at his best, a phenomenal scorer and an all-time great defender who I think was perfectly built to complement a lead playmaker. And at least for one postseason, he was a top 3 player on the planet for a championship team. Like 2020 AD, bubble AD especially, what a monster. I do think there's an argument he was the best player in that postseason for the Lakers. And that was an outlier jump shooting run. That's why I don't think you can act like that's the player AD was throughout the course of even his peak years, because he wasn't. You know, he didn't shoot 37% from 3 and make 50+% of his mid-range jumpers like he did in the bubble. But still, I mean, from 2017 to 2020, 27.2 points per game on +4% relative true shooting in the regular season, 28.4 points per game on +7.5% relative true shooting in the playoffs. A lot of those playoff numbers are carried by the bubble, but like that's just a crazy combination of scoring volume and efficiency and the versatility where he was this great vertical spacer lob threat, but he also did have the jump shooting skill when he was at his best, and the paint touch scoring and the post-up game was pretty good. Like very well-rounded as a scorer when he had it all going. And then he's also one of the most versatile defensive bigs ever, like somebody who could play every coverage at a high level, can get out and switch, can come out and play up at the level, and can be disruptive with his length and activity out in space, is a good drop defender because he's still like an elite deterrent rim protector. Like he could do it all, and I think that made him a really exceptional playoff defender. Like notably, when we think about the best defenders of this era, or just great defensive bigs in NBA history overall, AD is not one of those guys who was a one-man top 5 defense. Rudy Gobert is one of those guys, right? There are anchors like that in NBA history. That was never AD. AD was on a lot of average defenses in New Orleans, and even outside of 2020 in LA, he was on a lot of average defenses. But in the playoffs, versatility is just at such a premium, and we saw him pose such major problems to so many different offenses in so many different ways because of his defensive versatility, and I think that's his greatest value. With the varied scoring arsenal, like it's a pretty obvious impact formula there, and over his career made his teams a good bit better, like almost a +5 career on off swing. The Pelicans won over 46% of their games with him, just 32% without him. The Lakers won 60% of their games with him, 51% without him. So not the biggest difference you're ever going to see there, but a very significant one over a large sample. But when I come back to the knocks, I mean, I think you can see part of it in the Pelicans just being so mediocre throughout his time there. And obviously he was not set up with good teams, but because he was not like that sort of one-man historic defensive anchor in the regular season, and although he was a very good scorer, he was such a mediocre passer. Like he just wasn't really a creator. And so his offensive impact wasn't really that substantial when it comes to like floor raising. He was meant, and this is similar to what I'm talking about with Ewing, right? Now the difference is AD's playoff scoring translated much better, but he's meant to be with somebody who can carry the playmaking load, and he can be a high level scorer for you, play finisher, and get buckets on his own in spots. But even there, I mean, the jump shooting inconsistency is significant outside of the remarkable 2020 bubble run. And so that's where I think mediocre floor raising, but really high peak in the right situation with decent longevity. Like, I mean, I think that's the knock on AD, but also he was so good so fast that like he's been at least an all-star level when available for a dozen years. He's just always going to miss some time. That's the problem. But the peak was too good for me to have him any lower than this. I think all the way 2017 to 2020, and that's a strong period in the NBA. He's a top 3 to 6 player that entire window. It's LeBron, Steph, KD, Kawhi, Harden, and Anthony Davis is the guy who to me was always in there. It's a little late for Chris Paul. I mean, he's probably the next guy, but AD's really damn good at his best, and so the peak is too good for me to have him any lower.
Agreed. I think, I don't know, looking back, I was just kind of surprised at some of the numbers. And, like, obviously, like, little wrinkles, like you're mentioning, came and went, right? If it's him, where he is athletically during this. Because you're right, it's not all, like, if we could just take the best, version of AD from each, like the fluidity from the Pelicans pre-injury, right? If we could take that kind of athleticism, the IQ that AD would develop and become this monstrous defensive player in so many different ways, if we could take the jump shooting purely from the 2020 run, that's ideal. But that being said, I was just kind of surprised. And the theme that I'm alluding to at this point of the list is like guys that were never number ones that could put you over the top, but as number twos, it's like the perfect kind of compliment. And that is why I have, even with the availability concerns and the brevity of the peak, which are important with AD, I do have him a few spots higher. And so I will talk about him in next episode.
I would also say, like, even though I just don't think AD was ever, like, meant to be a very good floor raiser, he's gotten pretty bad luck in terms of just, like, the teams he's had around him. I mean, like, the Pelicans teams, like, they mostly just sucked, outside of Drew.
Boogie circumstance, they, go all in, make that big trade. You're supposed to have the best front court in basketball, and then that just all falls apart.
And then post-2020 with the Lakers, I mean, that front office pretty much bungled everything. And, like, it was just LeBron and AD carrying those teams pretty much all the way from 2021 until he was traded. And now, did they carry them to very good places? No. But part of that was, I mean, the roster around them sucked. And also AD's availability issues. In 2021 and 2022, AD also just wasn't the same player. And then he bounced back and he was really good again in 2023 and 2024. So interesting career for sure. I will say when you talk about like taking the best of everything with AD, I do think 2020 was that. I mean, I think he was just the best at everything. But I also think the 2023 postseason defensively, I mean, what he did to the Grizzlies and Warriors offenses both in such different ways. With the Grizzlies, it was all about the rim protection. With the Warriors, it was about his ability to come out and guard in space. Like, just the ultimate testament to his defensive versatility. Also a rebounding monster, like you said. And the hands. I mean, you always have to talk about the hands with AD. He's one of the best bigs ever when it comes to generating steals and generating stocks overall. Just a legendary defensive playmaker. So, yeah, I love the peak, but the lack of availability does hurt him a little bit. So, who do you have in your 33 spot, Logan?
I had trouble ranking this guy, and I think he has an almost untouchable kind of perfect career. I think I had him a little bit higher last time we did this ranking. This is where I have Hondo, John Havlicek. I've got him in my 33 spot, and like, there's really no knocks to have on Hondo. I mean, I think he's got a really fascinating and interesting career, but he's so well-rounded, he's so impactful, and he's got great longevity as well. I mean, from 64 to 77 in the regular season, he's given you 22, 6, and 5 on 44% from the field, 1.2 steals per game. In the playoffs, 23, 7, and 5, similar efficiency and defensive numbers, and the guy is just super well-rounded. I think he has such a fascinating career. This is a guy who was drafted in the NBA and the NFL draft. I mean, talk about versatility. But coming out of Ohio State, it's all about his endurance, his stamina, his motor, and his sacrifice to me. This is a guy that came off the bench for the Celtics for a long time and was just impactful in the minutes that they gave him. Ends up becoming a really good ball handler and playmaker and one of the most versatile and impactful players in the league, playing at the forward and the guard spot for the Sixers. You know, he just has incredible versatility and roles across different eras for the Celtics. You know, in the Bob Cousy era, he's the sixth man coming off the bench, and then he develops into this leader of the Celtics later on, and he becomes a really effective scorer and jump shooter later in his career. You know, Bob Cousy liked to geek on him that he wasn't a really good shooter and scorer. He developed that out.
Yeah, fuck Bob Cousy.
Yeah, fuck Bob Cousy. That's right.
Team Hondo. No, just kidding, guys. Bob Cousy hasn't done anything wrong that I know of.
But, you know, Hondo developed shooting throughout his career, and there's just distinct moments through Hondo's career that you can just point to.
Like when he stole the ball.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of them, yeah. I mean, but 1968, Game 7, the Eastern Conference Finals against Philadelphia, he drops a 40-piece. 76, Game 5 of the NBA Finals, he forces triple overtime against Phoenix with a game-tying shot. As you mentioned, defense. Havlicek stole the ball. 65, the Eastern Conference Finals against Philadelphia. That's an all-timer. Like, the guy's an 11-time All-NBA selection. He's an 8-time All-Star, an 8-time All-Defense selection. The only knock on him that I can have is that he wasn't ever a number one in the way that other guys weren't that are higher on my list until later in his career. You know, like, and that's a debate. You know, you can go with Cowens, or, you know, you can make the debate, but he just wasn't the established. He was a cog in the machine for a while and a very vital and important one. And then later on in his career, he became that number one, but so versatile, so impactful. He did it for so long. Hondo's just a winner. And so I played with him higher on my list. But like I said, there's a theme at this part of my list where if you weren't the guy above and beyond, leading, you know, to greatness solely on one side of the ball or the other, that is where I have guys slightly higher. But I felt like this felt appropriate for a guy like Hondo here in my 33 spot. So, I mean, I had him in my top 25 last time we did this ranking. If somebody wanted to rank him that highly, I don't think there's a ton of holes to poke in Hondo's case. He's got the all-time moments. He's got the longevity. And again, he's so versatile. He's so well-rounded. There's not many negative things I can say about Hondo.
I feel like he is the hardest player I've had to rank so far. I was considering him at 33. I wound up with him at number 30. And there's a tier of three guys who we're about to get to for me where I was like, they so clearly have the better peaks. Well, especially two of them, like so clearly have the better peaks. But I keep coming back to the longevity. And it's like, especially considering the era, the fact that Hondo hardly missed any time over a 16-year career in the 60s and 70s, and he was damn good for the entirety of it. I mean, like you said, he grew a ton over his career, but was a positive contributor for 16 years and was always on the court with a great playoff resume. Like, I do value that. And I guess this is kind of an obvious thing to say, but I do just want to say it outright. It's like the reason longevity has mattered to me so much is it's just like if two players are at all comparable, just give me the guy who gave me 5 more good years, right? It's like when it comes down to giving you chances, when it comes down to giving you impact, doing it for longer is a huge deal.
Yeah, and I think the growth in his game individually is really important to mention, just the layers that he added, right? He comes in as a defender, he develops the playmaking and ball handling, he develops as a jump shooter, like all that's immaculate. But I also just want to mention the personal sacrifice. That's what I think is really cool about Hondo is the fact that he didn't take issue with coming off the bench. He took that as a pride kind of thing, that I'm gonna do my job, I'm gonna do the work, and I think that is something important to mention. Like Hondo was willing to do that and to come off the bench, and then later on he elevates and steps into the role where he is the de facto leader of the Celtics, and I just think that's really impressive, you know, for such a winning player to be willing to make that kind of sacrifice and come off the bench in doing that for such a great team. Hondo's awesome, man. I just loved going back and reading the story of Hondo. He's such a fascinating character. And such a unique career of the guys that we're going to talk about. But yeah, consistently available, versatile impact, and he did it for a really long time.
He was willing to come off the bench because Frank Ramsey had already made that shit cool for the Celtics. And Frank Ramsey was the balls if you were growing up watching basketball in the 50s. Yeah, I think you said it. I mean, improved dramatically as a jump shooter, became a more efficient scorer, took a huge playmaking leap, and that all really came together after Russell retired. And that's where I do think his peak from 70 to 72 can get underrated. He was giving you 28, 8, and 7 with like slight plus efficiency and really strong defense at that time.
Yeah.
Like great defense. I actually think that's Hondo's greatest skill. He's one of the best defensive wings in NBA history. Great instinct, super physical, long, disciplined, great hands, great conditioning, like very versatile defensively for that time, could guard up above his position, above his size a bit. And then as a scorer, really good off ball, super active, good size, skill, strength, got to be a high level jump shooter. And I do think the playoff resume with him is really impressive. Like 1966 to 74 in the playoffs, he gives you 26, 8, and 6 on plus 2% relative true shooting with really good defense, with big moments like you're saying. His peak is definitely not as strong as most of the guys in this range, but he was a top 5 guy for a few years. I will say the one year that he was asked to lead a team without Russell or Cowens, they only won 34 games. And that's the hard thing about Hondo, is I don't want to give him too much credit for his situation, because it's like, yeah, he won 8 championships. I do believe he was the best player on the 74 team. And I would say he was a top 2 player on another 5 championship teams. But he also played with Bill Russell, who was like the greatest winning machine in NBA history at that time. And he also won 3 rings when like he was young, and Sam Jones was still the second best guy on those teams. So I think it's like, yes, he had a winning skill set because he was so well-rounded, like being that level of playmaker and defender while you also are, you know, a very consistent volume scorer at the least. That's a great all-around formula, but he did have efficiency limitations. I don't think he was like meant to be a floor raiser. I don't think he was ever going to be like a guy who had a super high peak and carried teams for much of his career. I think honestly, we talk about some of these guys and it's like, oh, they had bad breaks. This is probably a very good outcome for John Havlicek's career. But again, he did a lot of things at a high level for a really long time. And the really long time is the big thing, because in my 33 spot, I have a player whose peak I think is in a completely different tier than John Havlicek. But the guy is 27 years old. He's still putting his resume together. And so that's why I have SGA right here in my 33 spot. I think people know how I feel about Shai's peak. I'm very high on it. Although I will say, like, I'm a little bit lower on it now after this playoff run, because his game did not translate as seamlessly to the playoffs as I thought it would. But I do think what we saw this year tells us that Shai is at a top 10-ish regular season peak of all time right now. I'm not saying the playoff peak is at that level, but like, he just won back-to-back strong MVPs. He deservedly won in strong MVP races. He had the greatest on-ball scoring regular season we've ever seen. He hit a combination of scoring volume and efficiency per possession that only he and 2016 Steph have ever hit. A Shai pick and roll and a Shai isolation were 2 of the 5 most efficient play types in NBA history this year, and he was the best player on a team that, in terms of net rating, is on a 2-year run in the regular season, the likes of which only Michael Jordan's Bulls have ever achieved. And he did that with a massive, massive impact on their performance. Like, over the last 3 years, you just look at the resume in the regular season, 31.5 points per game, 5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, with 2.6 stocks, like legit plus defense, on almost plus 8% relative true shooting with just 2.3 turnovers. So all-time great scoring, strong playmaking, plus defense, insane efficiency, insane value in the possession game, like just an absolute machine. And I think I've said all this stuff about Shai many times over, but you really can't overstate that in the regular season, he's essentially been like the perfect guard. I mean, the closest comparison to this overall profile he's put together is Michael Jordan, and his teams have been unbeatable, basically, when he plays. They win 80% of their games with him over the last 3 years. They're 15-12 without him. They win 55%. So they're still an above average team because they're super talented and super deep, but that is a massive difference. Like, they're solid without Shai. He vaults them into this historic category. He's done it without Chet, who I think he's 46-8 without in the last couple regular seasons, without J-Dub, who he's like 40-something and 4 without. Like, you take his best teammate, second best teammate out of the equation, and the formula that is Shai's offensive value, while he can still be a plus defender with this great defense around him, it's just led to historic results no matter what in the regular season. It's everything that I laid out: top tier scoring peak, absurd efficiency, strong playmaking, plus defense, monstrous impact on winning, leading to some of the best regular season teams we've ever seen. But the playoffs with Shai haven't been quite the same. He is still giving you, over these last 3 runs, 29, 5, and 7 on about plus 2% relative true shooting. So you still see the volume production. The efficiency does take a significant dip, though, and even the scoring volume isn't quite the same. And we've seen him run into some very aggressive and challenging defensive coverages that have given him some trouble. And instead of leading OKC to a +8 relative offensive rating, like he's doing in the regular season, he's only leading them to a +2.5 relative offensive rating. So the elite team offensive heights that he's produced in the regular season, he hasn't in the playoffs yet. And I think there are still some nuances that he needs to add to his game. Like, the reality is, in the regular season, teams are not going to throw the kitchen sink at him like they are in the playoffs. And so he can pretty much get to his stuff. And if you play Shai pretty straight up, like, he is just so damn good on so many levels. Like, he is an unbelievable driver and rim finisher. He's an all-time great mid-range shot maker. And in the regular season, the step-back 3 has been a weapon for him. And he gets to the free throw line at a really high rate. Like, he's just been unstoppable as an on-ball scorer. But I do think when he faces playoff defenses that really load up on him, that are like ridiculously aggressive with gap help and outright doubles, but again, just overall slanting their defense towards his side of the court, like, it helps if there are more ways to get you involved, if you can get the player moving and attacking in space to counter that preemptive loading up. And that's what Shai still hasn't really figured out. That off-ball scoring would take him up another level, I think, in the playoffs against these elite loaded-up defenses. And then the volume three-point shooting. That's the other thing I look at, where it's like, all right, you're loading up on me. I can still get to this step-back 3 at volume, and that's a comfortable shot. Or I can still get to this 3 off the catch, off movement, coming around a screen. He just hasn't had that in the playoffs. And so that's why this regular season peak that is, again, one of like the very greatest we've ever seen hasn't translated as well to the playoffs. He is still probably the best overall playoff player of the last 2 years, though I do think that's worth noting. I thought he was the best player in the 2025 playoffs. I thought he outplayed Jokic head-to-head. I don't think he was the best player in this year's playoffs. I think that designation goes to Wemby, but I still think that Shai was super impactful because of the coverages that he draws. He still had, some really great performances, but there were more down games. It was not the Shai that we saw in the regular season. But still, again, this is where like the bar, the standard is super important that we talk about. Shai can drop and still make a good argument for best playoff player on the planet because he's just that insanely good as a basketball player, period. So I think that's a criticism of Shai, that the playoff performance hasn't been the same. The biggest knock, though, the biggest reason I don't have him higher is he's only 27 years old, and he's got 4 years as a clear top 5 guy. He's got 2 years as a top 2 guy with a good case for best in the world. But if I'm viewing this in terms of who gives me the best chance to win the most championships over their career, longevity matters a good bit. And even if I feel like, okay, Shai of these last 4 years, and especially these last 2 years, yeah, in those individual seasons, he gives me as good a chance as only like the top 15 players in NBA history, or whatever number that is exactly. I can feel that way and still acknowledge that like a James Harden just gives me a lot more bites at the apple at this point. I absolutely think that peak Shai is better than peak Harden, but does 4 years of superstar Shai actually give me a better chance to win more championships than 14 to 15 years of star Harden with, the elite peak in there? I couldn't get there just yet. I know you're going to say yes, but it's like, Logan, if you gave James Harden a team as talented as the Thunder of last year, could he not have won the title? Like, he could have.
I don't think Harden's ever been as good as Shai.
I don't think he is either. I don't think he is either. That's what I just said.
Well, that's
my point is, there's a decade difference of star impact.
there's a decade difference, but there's a play style difference. I mean, I think this is just a difference of our criteria more so than anything else. I do think that the peak, to me, overrides that. And we're not that far off in terms of, I'm going to bring up SGA next episode. We're not that far off at all. Like, we're very close, actually, in terms of where we've ranked SGA right now. I just think his value is the number one, and my confidence in him is the number one, especially compared to the guys that are in this section to me. I just think it's a difference of criteria and how much we value longevity. I think that it's possible that Harden could have done it with a team like that, certainly, but I prefer how Shai plays more so than anything else.
Okay, but here's the thing. It's like, if Shai had a dominant title run this year, if it were regular season Shai, then I would say, yeah, fuck it. I mean, he'd probably already be around top 25, because I would be like, that regular season level plus that playoff performance, that'll put you over the top. But we haven't seen that playoff run out of him yet. And that's the thing. It's like, yes, Harden dropped in the playoffs from an extremely high place. Shai has also dropped in these last two playoffs. I would still take Shai in terms of his last 3 years in the playoffs over Harden's best 3 years in the playoffs. But it's not like we're just copy and pasting regular season Shai to the playoffs. And so that's where I do come down to the longevity gap, and it's just way too significant. And it's like, yeah, if you're a peak purist, Shai's better. Shai's better at his peak than Harden, but the gap in peak is just not as big as the gap in longevity. I mean, I still have them back to back because I do value Shai's peak that much. That's why I have him 14 spots higher than Luka. I think that Shai is one of the easiest players ever to build a great team around, because he has an all-time great superpower in his scoring, and he positively impacts the game in so many different ways, so many different dimensions. That's so rare for a player with offensive load that he has, right? To also be so good at taking care of the basketball and be a good defender. But I just need to see a little bit more of it translate to the playoffs to have Shai higher than this. And I do expect that to happen. He's only 27. I do think he'll improve this offseason. I think he's improved every single offseason of his career. But there's just a couple things that I didn't think like he really needed. I'm going to be honest. Well, I thought the three-point shot needed to hold up. That's kind of a given. But I don't think coming into these playoffs, I foresaw the off-ball scoring limitations holding Shai back from reaching that same level like they ended up doing. I thought, oh, Shai's unstoppable as an on-ball scorer, and that's going to translate. And it turns out it's like, no, people just aren't going to let him get to his usual stuff in the playoffs, and you can take extreme measures to do that, and he just has to have more answers to counter that.
I mean, my issue with that is just that, and I agree with most of the points you're making. When we're looking at specifically at Harden, I just think Harden is so much more limited in terms of his versatility as a scorer. And I'm not saying that he didn't get crazy coverages thrown at him either. I just think Harden at his peak is a little bit easier to defend. I do believe that
a little bit.
Playoffs.
A little bit, but does a little bit offset a decade difference of Harden just being really good?
Harden never had the counters in the mid-range and the versatility that SGA has.
But Logan, I mean, trust me there, I've been with you, brother. I mean, I said that 1,000 times over, and then we got to the playoffs, and it's like, that actually didn't make a substantial difference, because it's like
against the greatest defensive player that we've maybe ever seen, though, you know?
But it's not just that. It's like, when defenses load up on Shai like that, his counter cannot just be repeatedly 18-foot middies. And he also didn't make them at the same clip. So it's like, my thing was, yes, absolutely. I was like, Shai is a much more versatile scorer because he does have so many counters. But what I feel after this playoff run is the scoring versatility that is significant that he has to add to his game is that off-ball dimension, where it's not so much about, okay, how many different counters do you have on the ball? No. But I'm saying if neither of them are going to be as effective as on-ball scorers in the playoffs, which they aren't up to this point. Shai hasn't been as effective as an on-ball scorer in the playoffs. I can't just be like, oh, well, the mid-range is going to translate better just because that's what I thought, if that's not what actually happened in these last two playoff runs. And that's all we're ranking up at this point, is what's actually happened. I mean, I hope Shai skies much higher than this, but at this very moment, this is where I feel comfortable with him.
And I want to be clear about this. It's not that Harden didn't face extreme coverages. I do think the coverages that Shai is getting are more extreme, and he's getting these because he's a better player.
I mean, Harden did get trapped at half court. Harden did have a defense try to guard him from behind. I think in the extreme measures department, both these guys are pretty much grading out at the highest level.
The peak
I mean,
to me,
both
just
defenses are going to extreme measures just to try to take away the bread and butter scoring from these guys. And I don't think either of them have aced the test in the playoffs.
I don't think they've aced the test. I think Shai has done better on the test, and I do still prefer Shai's play style and peak to Harden. So that's the discrepancy for me, and that's why I do take SGA.
Okay, once again, I just think we're going to disagree on the value of longevity here.
I do think it's a longevity difference. I also think Shai's way better at protecting the basketball, too, than Harden.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's like you yourself said, I don't want to stick on this forever, but like Shai is slightly harder to guard than Harden in the playoffs. And I would agree with that, but like, isn't the key word there kind of slightly when another dude has like been a star for a decade longer? I don't want to beat a dead horse. I think we're just going to disagree on that. I just think
fact that Harden has shit his pants so many times, man.
Yeah, but I think you are really hard on him for the older years when it's like, yes, it's disappointing, but also he's giving you, I mean, bonus value compared to like so many other great players in history to still be this good at 35, 36 years old, even though he does disappoint in the playoffs.
It's the peak longevity thing.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to me. So
the difference just isn't big enough for me.
It is for me. That's why we're not going to talk about Shai for me in this episode. I got him on next one.
All right. Well, Logan, in my 32 spot, I do have James Harden. Who do you have?
So like I said, there is a theme. This may seem low. This is where I have Scottie Pippen at. And
okay,
Scottie was a tough player to rank because I think he has such a valuable winning skill set. One of the all-time great defenders, arguably the greatest perimeter defender of all time, a really great rebounder, an underrated playmaker. But this is, like I said, I have a theme of this list, and this is where I have a lot of the number twos that are great throughout NBA history. Scottie could be higher if he had more longevity. Scottie could be higher if his scoring translated better to the playoffs, if he was more unstoppable and effective as a scorer. But like I said, this is kind of the co-stars range of my list, and it's where you're a really impactful player, you're really versatile, you're a winner. Ultimately, though, in the height of heights of your peak, I still don't view you as a number one. And so there, like we've been mentioning, I feel like the theme of this episode is this kind of peak longevity, kind of push-pull process, and that's where I come down on Scottie, where I just look at the names that I have above him in my every spot higher, basically. I just do think the peak is higher, and in some cases, the peak and longevity are higher. Scottie was tough to rank because he is so successful. He's got the 6 rings. Ultimately, he gets them, all the time as the number 2, and I feel like when we did see Scottie as the lead guy, it didn't lead to the results that that some of the other guys had. I mean, I just think that it didn't lead to the same playoff success as, obviously when he was the number 2. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Well, that's obvious. Yeah. I'm just saying, like, are you not moved by the fact that in 94 and 95, they were still a really good team when Scottie was the
really good.
number 1?
I'm kind of scarred ultimately by Scottie bitching at Phil for running a play for Tony Kukoc on the end, and Scottie said, I'm going to go sit my happy ass on the bench, and Tony hit the game winner. I just think that, like, there's a...
Yeah, you're way more focused on, like, little moments and anecdotes than I am, I feel, throughout
I think they kind of show...
But, like, how? I mean, Scottie's one of the great winners in NBA history. Scottie was, like, completely willing to do all the little things for his entire career. Why is one play going to define him in a negative way? That doesn't make sense.
It's not, but we also saw multiple runs of Scottie as the number 1, and they didn't achieve what they did when he was the number 2. Like, I think that's just cut and dry.
I mean, they got to Game 7 of the second round against the team that got to Game 7 of the finals when they took a player who was at the highest peak in NBA history off the team. Like, obviously, I'm not going to sit here and argue that Scottie is a comparable number 1 to some other guys who are going to be in the top 30 range, but I think the brief stint he had as a number 1 is pretty good. It's pretty good. Better than you're giving it credit for.
Okay, I just don't think Scottie's number 1 reaches any of the players above him. I think everyone peaked higher than Scottie in my top 31. That's why he's not any higher. I think all of their peaks are higher.
I just think you're going to have some guys who have not done it for nearly as long as Scottie was an extremely impactful player. Yeah. All right. So that is where we'll disagree again. I mean, I do think it's like there is no Bulls dynasty without Scottie Pippen. And I think you can't really underrate how fundamental he was to their defenses being as strong as they were. What an excellent complement he was offensively. And even though he wasn't an upper echelon scorer, the fact that he was one of the best passing forwards in NBA history, one of the best rebounding forwards in NBA history, and probably the greatest overall wing defender ever. I guess it depends on what you consider Dennis Rodman, but like he definitely has a strong claim for that spot. He was just so damn impactful. Over his career, the Bulls won 72% of their games with him compared to 61% without him. Like the Bulls took the leap when Scottie became Scottie. MJ was MJ. MJ had already been MJ. And I'm not saying that he didn't make improvements like from 91 to 93, but 1989, 1990 MJ, like he was already clearly the best player on the planet. It was Scottie really blossoming that made the Bulls the juggernaut that they were. And also I do think like it's really impressive that in the games that Scottie played without Michael Jordan in Chicago, they won 61% of their games. You compare that to the Bulls in all other games without Michael Jordan over Jordan's Bulls career, they won just 32% of those games. So it's like, I mean, it's obvious you take both MJ and Scottie off the team and they flat out suck. But like they really did flat out suck when you did that. And when you left Scottie out there without MJ, like they were still a really good basketball team. And so I do think that he deserves a lot of credit for a really unique level of two-way impact, and I do have him in my top 30 accordingly. So, who do you have at 31, Logan?
This is where I have David Robinson.
Oh, my God. Oh, wow. Too low. Okay, why is that?
It's really the longevity that keeps him from being higher. And I mean, it's the longevity and the peak in tandem. I think that David Robinson's got an incredible two-way ceiling. I mean, the defense, like during his prime, 5.3 stocks per game. He's one of the greatest athletes, I think, in the history of the game. The power and free throw drawing element of his game. He's up near 9 to 10 free throw attempts per game. I just think he's got real scoring limitations in the playoffs. You know, pre-Duncan, his efficiency drops by about 4% from the field. His true shooting drops by about 4% from the regular season to the playoffs, and I think there's some reasons for this. The reliance on the mid-range jumper, the reliance on the athleticism, the lack of scoring craft, and so I think his peak is very high. I don't think he was ever meant to be a number one offensively in the way that he needed to be at his absolute prime. I think that's why when you see a guy like Duncan come along, and obviously Robinson dealt with some injuries things, and that's a component for me in Robinson being at my 31 spot. His career starts late because he was in the Naval Academy, and so he doesn't make his NBA debut until he's an older player. Granted, I mean, he is a little bit more polished than some guys, but his career starts late. And to me, his peak ends short. You know, he breaks his foot in 1996. The Spurs get Duncan, and then the rest of his career, he's dealing with back problems. So for me, his peak isn't as high as some of these other players. And for as much as his peak is as high, I think there are some guys who maybe their peak isn't as high as Robinson's. They do it for longer. So it's this kind of balancing act where I feel like Robinson's peak is shorter than some of these other guys higher on my list. And then, again, it's a balancing act, as I think this whole episode has been. And then for some other guys, I do hold the lack of longevity against him. Ultimately, though, the thing that doesn't have David Robinson higher for me on this list is the fact that I don't view David Robinson. I think he's an all-time great floor raiser. I don't look at him as an offensive number one the way I do some of these other players on my list. So I have David Robinson here in my 31 spot.
Yeah, I just can't get with this at all whatsoever. I mean, I do think that he had playoff offensive issues, but like the place that he was able to single-handedly get you to with limited supporting casts, like it is just the easiest thing in the world to imagine, like, you pairing David Robinson with, like, even a Terry Porter in the mid 90s. Like, they're going to win a title. Like, the lack of talent around him and the level that he still got them to year after year, he is one of the very greatest floor raisers in NBA history, probably at least a top 10 regular season floor raiser in NBA history. And you're saying offensive number one, like, he wasn't meant to be that on a championship team. He's a top 5 defender in NBA history who still was a scoring machine. And if they just could have taken a little bit of the massive offensive load off his plate in the playoffs, like, it's so easy to see David Robinson being the best player on a championship team. I don't know, man. Like, the guy is responsible for 2 of the greatest single season turnarounds in NBA history. They won 21 games the year before he joined the Spurs. They won 56 games his rookie season. He took them from being a bottom tier offense to a solid one, and from being a below average defense to an elite defense, and they were the best defense in the NBA in the early 90s, and there were other changes that were made to that roster that year as well, but overwhelmingly the driving force is David Robinson. And then obviously 1998, Tim Duncan comes in with him as well, so that is very much a two-pronged change that leads to another one of the greatest turnarounds in NBA history. But what I think is really significant is the other side of that. 1997, for those who don't know, the Spurs only win 20 games. They come back, Robinson is healthy, Duncan is a rookie. They win 56 games the next year. But just think about the fact that, like, losing David Robinson took them from a 59-win team to a 20-win team, and then he gets back out there, and they are immediately a dominant force and a contender again. Over the course of the 1990s, they won 68% of their games with Robinson. They were elite every year. They won 30% of the games without him. They fell apart constantly when he was off the court. It's not just the 1997 season. You look at 1992, they go 42-26 with Robinson, 5-9 without him. I just think you're way too low on him. You're way too hard on the playoff performance, the playoff offense, because, like, he was still one of the most dominant defensive forces in NBA history in the playoffs. He was still one of the most dominant defenders ever in 1999, when he has a cheeky argument for being the best player on a championship team. He was the best defender on that team, and it was their historic defense that made them a champion at that time. And he's still giving you star-level impact through 2001. He's obviously not the same, but the defense, the defense was still dominant.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm just saying, like, what do you do with the fact that his absolute prime is basically, he starts late, he doesn't debut until he's 24 years old, and his actual, like, prime, his absolute apex, his peak is, like, 6 or 7 seasons.
What I do with it is also acknowledge that there's another 4 seasons of, like, clear star-level impact on top of that, and that the 7 seasons you do get out of him to start his career are, like, one of the greatest regular season peaks that we've ever seen. That's what I do with it. I mean, the totality of that, just no way I could have kept him out of my top 30. I think he's got to be in the top 25. I think he's one of the most impactful basketball players ever, and I think he is somebody who, in the first stage of his career, just terribly unlucky when it comes to the circumstances. But, like, it is remarkable the teams that he was getting to win 59, 62, 55 games every year, that he was getting to still win playoff series. From 1990 to 1996, he's going to single-handedly make you a top 3 defense almost every single year, while he's giving you 26, 12, and 3 on plus 6% relative true shooting. And then even with the drop in the playoffs, which is absolutely real, he's still giving you 24, 12, and 3 on plus 2% relative true shooting with top 5 all-time defense. Like, that foundation is just so unique. That two-way dominance is in the inner circle of the all-time greats. Like, in the 90s, the Spurs were a minus 7.3 net team in the games that Robinson and missed compared to they were better than a +5 net team in all the games that he played. Like, it was a 12.5 point swing between the games that he played and the games that he missed. And I just wish that we had full plus minus data for his full career, because he is absolutely one of the GOATs in that. And it's just a shame that the Spurs didn't have more offensive help for him in his peak years, because he was asked to carry those teams on both sides of the ball in a way very few players have ever been asked to do, and he still made them awesome teams. Like, he still did that in a way that, even though they didn't win a title, goes down as one of the greatest carry jobs in NBA history. That's what he did as a number one in his peak years, and then he still had awesome years as the second best player, contributing to dominant teams alongside Duncan. I just think you're too focused on the scoring with a player whose value was overwhelmingly about the other side of the ball, who was one of the very greatest we've ever seen. And the fact that he was the level of scorer that he was just remarkable. And it's what made him such a monster. But I don't know. I mean, I think if you're going like peak for peak, Robinson is a better regular season player than Tim Duncan, like a lot of the very greatest bigs ever. Not a better playoff player, worse playoff player, clearly, but to be in that conversation, that level of impact, he's just one of the greatest regular season players we've ever seen. And the longevity is absolutely good enough. Like, the longevity, it's not great, but it is very solid. I mean, 10 All-NBA seasons, like, I think that's more than a lot of great players are going to give you. So we will strongly disagree on David Robinson. I'll get to him next episode. In my number 31 spot, I have another Spurs legend. This is where I have Kawhi Leonard, who is a very interesting player to rank, because I think the peak is very high, but the longevity and the availability is obviously an issue with his case. That being said, at his best, he gives you one of the great scoring and defense combinations we've ever seen. He is on the short list for greatest wing defender ever at his best. I would still give that designation to Scottie Pippen. I think he's a better off-ball defender, but I think when it comes to just one-on-one matchup versatility, perimeter defense, like, Kawhi, absolutely unfathomable when you're talking about his best years with the Spurs, and even into 2019 with the Raptors, still an elite defensive player. After that, not elite anymore, still a good defender, just like ridiculous measurables, so strong, such great hands, and an absolute insane defensive player. And then the playoff scoring, like, from 2016 to 2025, this is a guy who has given you 28, 8, and 4 on plus 6.5% relative true shooting in the playoffs. Somebody who I truly do think, because of his strength and shot-making combination, is just built to dominate in the playoffs. He's an elite mid-range scorer. He can get to his spots at will. He's never sped up. He's an elite ball handler. He's got great size. He can give you a bump. He can shoot over top. He's an elite three-point shooter too, and so that has just made him a scoring machine against basically any playoff defense that he can face. And this is a guy who is just monstrously impactful and has one of the great winning resumes in NBA history when available. I mean, over his career, a +8 on off swing, a +10 on court net rating, which is insane. In the Clippers years, you saw him peak offensively, where he's got a +9.5 offensive on off swing. Just incredible work on that side of the ball. In the early Spurs years, obviously, overwhelmingly impactful on the defensive end, and then became this two-way superstar by 2016, 2017. And in his years in San Antonio, they won over 76% of the games that he played, 59% of the games without him. Like, they were very talented teams, but Kawhi is sort of the ultimate ceiling raiser, where it's like, because of his playmaking limitations, he is not meant to carry a team. But when you have a good foundation and you can just drop in this super efficient 28 point per game scorer who can also defend the opposing team's best player, like, he's going to take any team from solid to very good, from good to great. And that's kind of been his formula throughout his career. Like, Kawhi has played on talented teams everywhere, with the Spurs, with the Raptors, with the Clippers, but he's always taken them from good to great. I mean, in the Clippers years, they win 66% of their games with him, 48% of their games without him. So I do think that Kawhi's peak clearly ranks higher than this. I mean, it's a top 20 peak in NBA history, but the challenge is he's only got 8 seasons where he played 50 plus games as a top 10 guy. And specifically in the playoffs, since he became a superstar, he's only finished 4 postseasons healthy. 2016, 2019, 2020, and this past year. In 2017 and 2021, he played 10 games in the playoffs, but then got hurt and was not able to finish either of those series. So that's a problem. I mean, when I think about giving me the best chance to win championships, you got to be on the court, and you especially have to be on the court in the playoffs. And for Kawhi, that has consistently been the pitfall in his career. He's also only played 798 career games. So longevity, availability are the clear weaknesses here, but he does have a championship run in which he was playing like arguably the best player in the world. He does have another title as a top 3 guy on a champion at 22 years old. And I think sometimes that gets overrated because people are like, oh, 2-time finals MVP. Obviously, the 2014 finals MVP and 2019 finals MVP are dramatically different, but it does still matter to me that he was impacting winning from like very early on in his career. And he just has a very consistent track record of making teams awesome. So Kawhi, when available, incredible. I considered him in the top 30 because the peak is so good. And it's not like he has Bill Walton or Embiid availability. I mean, it's not that different from Embiid, but it is better. His health track record is still better. But again, I mean, there are just guys for whom the longevity is a significant enough advantage to put them above Kawhi for me.
Yeah, I have Kawhi in my top 30. The peak is that high to me, and I just think I mean, when he has been available, it has translated. Like, I don't know, seeing I think the longevity is what hinders Kawhi, and like you're saying, the availability in these later years, but he really is just so rock solid and dependable, and like, when he's out there, I mean, the guy he feels effectively unstoppable. The strength aspect of his game, how he can just march guys down to his spots, get to wherever he's going. The jump shooting has been such a revelation throughout the course of his career. Like, obviously peaking with what he did in Toronto, and arguably he's a better jump shooter now. Like, the Los Angeles version of Kawhi is so damn good. It's really impressive because you think about how limited he was as a prospect, and that was a big knock on him. I will say the early years in San Antonio, they do matter to me with Kawhi. They're not the be-all, end-all, but the fact that he was an important cog and a winning machine and that good as a perimeter defender those early years, and then his star ascension, I agree. The thing that keeps Kawhi from where he's going to be on my list from being higher is the availability, but I just think the peak is absurd. I mean, the two-way peak is absolutely unbelievable with Kawhi. You're talking about a top 5 to 10 kind of offensive player on the planet while he's being, the best wing defender on earth. It's incredible. It is brief because, it's.
I don't know if outside of 2019, those two things ever like totally coincided, what you're saying. I mean, I do think there's the defensive peak with Kawhi with the Spurs. There's the offensive peak with him with the Clippers. The Raptors year is the best cross-section of the two. I think the one limitation with Kawhi as a basketball player is the playmaking, the mediocre passing. Like, I do think that's been an issue for him. In the last couple postseasons that we have seen were just some issues dealing with double teams, the inability to make like high level reads. And it is disappointing that at this age, at 34 years old, that's still an issue for him, but it is. So that's where I do think you see in the playoffs offensively, even though the scoring has been so great, like the Clippers offenses are actually only 1.5 points better with him on the court in the playoffs. I think the playmaking is the one knock that he does have there.
I think it's a fair criticism. And I mean, I think that you made a really good point. That's why when we've seen Kawhi be wildly successful, it's been in circumstances where he's had guys to take that off of his plate.
Yeah.
If it's Tony Parker in the early years, if it's Fred VanVleet and company in Toronto, if it's Harden in the Clippers years. Yeah, Kyle Lowry. Like, I think it's a fair criticism of Kawhi.
And it's a reason I think that he is considered like the NBA mercenary, because it's like if you do that infrastructure, you just drop him in and he's going to get buckets and he's going to get stops on an island. And That's obviously a very celebrated, romanticized skill set. Like, we love the two-way scoring wing. Kawhi is one of the best that we've ever seen, and I don't say romanticized to mean that it isn't extremely effective, because it is. I mean, Kawhi is an extremely impactful player. I just think over the course of a career, when it comes to, again, giving me bites at the apple, giving me quality shots, like, he is held back by obviously a very unfortunate record of injuries. So with that, Logan, top 30 coming next week. But before we end this episode, let's recap your 40 to 31.
Affirmative, Mr. Breber.
Thank you, sir.
At 40, I've got James Harden.
He's
39.
averaging 40. I didn't even realize that. He was.
39, I've got Clyde Drexler. 38, I've got Bill Walton. 37, I've got the anomaly, Jayson Tatum. 36, I've got Isiah Thomas. 35, got nasty, man. 34, I got Elgin Baylor. 33, I've got Hondo, John Havlicek. 32, Scottie Pippen. And 31, the Admirable. The Admirable.
The Admirable Admiral. Yeah.
Let's rock with it. The Admirable Admiral. David
yeah.
Robinson in my 31 spot.
All right, at number 40, I had Bob Pettit. 39, Reggie Miller. 38, Jason Kidd. 37, John Stockton. 36, Patrick Ewing. 35, Elgin Baylor. 34, Anthony Davis. 33, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. 32, James Harden. And 31, Kawhi Leonard. Another near 3-hour episode, Logan, so I guess that's pretty much just going to be the standard going forward, but we hope that you guys are enjoying it. I know we are. This is just about my favorite thing to do. I love looking back to these great players and breaking down their careers, and we got 30 more to go, so it's going to be a ton of fun. You know where to find us. You know where to find the rest of this series. Hopefully you know where to find all of our trivia episodes throughout the summer that we're doing, which have been a ton of fun. We've only got one out now, but we have more coming every single week with wonderful guests from across the Nerd Sesh cinematic universe. And we've also got the draft live stream tomorrow night, so come hang out with us if you want during the NBA draft. We will be here, and we will be yapping as always. So we appreciate you guys as always. Thank you so much for listening to all this yap. We hope you enjoyed. And with that, I've been Carson Breber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.